Chapter 1476. It ended. The ferryman who had lived for 120 years sent the familiar figures into the distance, willingly with his head lowered, and quietly watched them leave. This was Su Ming's choice for them. It was the first time, and it would also be the last time. To Su Ming, the 120 years of 120 years were very long, but also very short. It was short because he had sent them away from the river of forgetfulness, but it was long because he had no idea how much time had passed when he waited for them to meet again in the future. Su Ming did not have the confidence either, which was why, even though his hope was long, there would still be a time when it would end. It was just like the fireworks in the sky. They would only disappear for a short moment, but they would remain beautiful in the people's minds for a long time. Su Ming's eyes gradually shone with the brightness they should have. Ninth Summit was in silence. The 100,000 berserkers had left, the 100,000 disciples of Ninth Summit had left, and even a large number of people had disappeared, causing the remaining people in Ninth Summit to sink into a daze. Ninth Summit, arid. If you want to stay, you can continue staying. If you want to leave, you can do so at any time, Su Ming said slowly. Su Ming said languidly. His voice reverberated through the entire Ninth Summit at that instant and fell into the ears of all the disciples, causing them to snap out of their daze. Su Ming closed his eyes. The bald crane stood by his side and stared at the familiar surroundings. It no longer felt too sad. With a single move, it disappeared to some unknown place. However, Su Ming, who knew the bald crane well, did not need to think to know what it was thinking at that moment. I'm rich. I'm rich. Haha, I'm really lucky this time. I sent away so many people, and when they leave, they definitely won't be able to take away a lot of crystals. Crystals, especially other people's crystals. The bald crane's face was filled with excitement. When it thought about this, it could not help but shudder, and it became even faster. Su Ming did not bother about the bald crane's actions. He closed his eyes for 20 years. He sensed all of Arid Triad trembling and sensed the descent of the destructive disaster. At that moment, Harmonious Morris Alba's wings should have overlapped with each other, but in truth, they were just a tiny bit away. That tiny bit was the final 100 years. In fact, Su Ming could sense true Immortal Sect World's existence in true Morning Tao World and Harmonious Morris Alba's presence in the other Expanse cosmoses in Arid Triad. The two great worlds were about to overlap. During the 20 years, Su Ming returned to Ninth Summit and closed his eyes. Most of the cultivators in the sect had already left. Most of the people who remained were old and did not have high levels of cultivation. These people no longer had the ambition to join a great sect. They only wished for peace. As for the others, the direct descendants of the Ninth Summit had already been chosen by Hu Zi, and the remaining people were the icing on the cake. Now that the cake was gone, the flowers would naturally continue to bloom elsewhere. 20 years later, the final 100 years before the disaster descended, the powerful warriors of the previous eons began to awaken. The first to awaken was the person who had fought against Su Ming in the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World. Soon after, an astonishing presence erupted from quite a number of places in Arid Triad Expanse cosmos. Quite a number of these presences spread out from the Emperor of Abyss True World, True Sacredine World, the Fourth True World, and Divine Essence Star Ocean. But most of them were in the Expanse cosmos, where Harmonious Morris Alba's fourth wing was. Gradually, powerful warriors began to walk through the galaxy, and gradually, bloody battles and the oppression of an aeon erupted during the 100 years. In truth, this was also a disaster, but it was a temporary release before all lives were destroyed. At the same time, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors led by Tion opened their eyes in Een Death Vortex. At the instant the 100 years arrived, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors opened their eyes. It's time. The 100 years have finally arrived. Low murmurs echoed in the Expanse cosmoses in Een Death Vortex. There were also broken, excited laughter and roars echoing in space. Everyone's blood before Arid Triad's disaster. Su Ming sighed softly and averted his gaze from Arid Triad Expanse cosmos. He did not pay attention to anything in the world outside. It did not matter whether it was Tion or Su Xianyi. At that moment, Su Ming did not want to bother with them. Even if the powerful warriors from the previous eons had thrown the entire universe into chaos, it was still a part of the loss. It was also something that should have happened before harmonious Morris Alba's four wings overlapped. However, Ninth Summit was a forbidden area. If anyone dared to take even half a step into it, then even if that person was a powerful warrior from the previous eons who claimed to be indestructible, they would still end up in Su Ming's place and learn just how brilliant the disaster of life was. Su Ming had killed far too many people. So what if they were powerful warriors from the previous eons? The only thing he remembered was the 100,000 cultivators who were trapped in a Kang's world in Divine Essence Star Ocean. He had promised those 100,000 cultivators that one day he would bring them out, and Su Ming would fulfill his promise. Should I return to Divine Essence Star Ocean again? Su Ming looked at the bald crane, who was counting crystals by the side. The bald crane lifted its head. After thinking about it carefully, it said seriously, "I've already taken away all the crystals there. It's already clean." Su Ming smiled. "All right, then you stay here." When Su Ming shook his head, he closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, a figure appeared in the galaxy in the barren lands of Divine Essence, a place where the spiritual aura in the world was incredibly lacking. That figure was naturally Su Ming. Su Ming stared at the barren lands of Divine Essence. He was familiar with everything there. He had been in this place for many years, and at that moment, when he thought about it, be it the time he was chased down or the time he was weak, all of them were filled with signs that had been carved into him. Clearly, at that time, he had been in Su Xianyi's hands, and all his paths had been arranged for him so that he could obtain nourishment from the seed of life extermination. However, when he turned his head around to look at it, the grudge and hatred in the past had already faded away. With a calm expression, Su Ming walked through the galaxy. When he approached the spot where a Kang had once been, his footsteps came to a halt. As if he had sensed something, he looked into the distance. There was a cultivation planet in the galaxy that was not too far away. There was a young man on it, and he was sitting cross-legged at the top of a mountain while exercising his breathing and meditating. As he breathed, the ferocious shadow of a big tree appeared behind him. It was a Kang. The wisp of soul that had escaped from Su Ming's hands in the past had gathered together to form a Kang. Su Ming stared at it, but did not know any of this. It continued meditating, occasionally opening its eyes to look around it cautiously. Aloofness and a dark shadow would often flash in its eyes, causing it to look incredibly sullen. This suited a Kang's habits. Clearly, over the years, it had learned quite a lot of cultivators' caution and cunning, which was why it could survive for so long in the barren lands of Divine Essence. Perhaps it had always been on guard against Su Ming. After all, to it, Su Ming's existence was a shadow that it had to fear for its entire life. It was afraid of Su Ming, but it also longed to devour him so that it could complete itself. If it had been the past, Su Ming would have had no reason to let this person go once he saw him. But right then, he only cast him a glance before averting his gaze. The difference in their levels and the difference in their worlds caused their enmity to turn into a fight between children. Su Ming did not bother with a Kang's figure that had gathered together again. He arrived in the 100,000 Kang worlds in the past. Almost at the instant Su Ming stepped into the world, all the stone monuments in the 100,000 Kang worlds shuddered with a bang. As they did so, all the people sitting and meditating in the world lifted their heads at the same time. Shock appeared on their faces. Even the cultivators who were immersed in the worlds formed by their memories were forcefully chased out. When they lifted their heads in shock, the 100,000 people in the world saw Su Ming walking over from above them. Some of them still remembered Su Ming. Some had already forgotten him. And there were also some who had not experienced the shock they felt when Su Ming appeared in the past. At that moment, they had dazed expressions on their faces. This place has existed for too long. I once promised all of you that there would come a day when the seal on this place would be broken. Today I have come, and I will break the seal on this place. I will release your shackles and return your souls to you. For now on, all of you will be free. Su Ming swept his gaze past the crowd and stopped for a moment on a few familiar faces. In the end, his gaze landed on the middle-aged man who had helped him in the past. At first glance, he seemed to be middle-aged, but if anyone took a closer look, they would find that he was already old. His wife's passing had perhaps become an eternal pain in his heart. He could have left in the past, but he could not bear to do so. Instead, he immersed himself in his memories to accompany his wife. As Su Ming spoke, the world with the 100,000 stone monuments let out a loud bang. The stone monuments shattered one by one, and the space at the edge of the area shattered layer by layer. In just the span of a few breaths, only one stone monument was left standing in front of the middle-aged man. Only you have the right to shatter this stone monument. I will not interfere with your choice. Su Ming cast a deep glance at the middle-aged man. When he turned around, he swept his gaze past the crowd. He did not see joy, but a deeper sense of bewilderment. It was as if these people could not get used to this change. But in the end, they would get used to it. Su Ming cast a glance at the world with the 100,000 stone monuments again. He remembered Sui Chen-zi and shook his head. When Su Ming turned around, he had already stepped into space. He had come to the barren lands of divine essence to break the seal on the world within the 100,000 stone monuments. He also wanted to go to Husband Gazing Mountain to take a look at the figure at the top of the mountain. He also wanted to fulfill the wish of the Sand Earthlings and go to Black Ink Planet, as well as send Tian Xiazi's disciple in name to the other side of the river. If it was possible, Su Ming also wanted to go to the Fifth Ocean and see whether the entrance to the Fifth True World truly existed there. He wanted to go there and take a look at the place where Su Zhan had died and the region where his soul had been gathered by Su Xianyi. 100 years is enough, Su Ming mumbled softly and walked into the distance. At that moment, a bloody storm that had swept through numerous tribes in divine essence, Star Ocean, continued. It was a withered old man who had a skeleton stuck to his back. His expression was apathetic, and wherever he went, there would be slaughter. Since the sword was going to be unsheathed in November, then he would have to fight for a month. Tomorrow, he would have to continue fighting. Do you have monthly votes? He wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed. Chapter 1477. Black Ink Planet was a planet that had once been familiar to Su Ming. In fact, he had even felt a sense of belonging to it. It recorded the past of the first god of berserkers, Lai Shanxiu. In fact, it could be said that if Lai Shanxiu was not around, Black Ink Planet would not have existed. While standing in the galaxy, Su Ming stared at Black Ink Planet in the distance. His gaze gradually focused on it. Then he looked towards Divine Essence Star Ocean, which was even further away. Bits and pieces of his memories slowly surfaced in his mind. He still remembered the fire from the fifth kiln burning the entire Divine Essence Star Ocean. He still remembered Su Xianyi's wife in the kiln, which made Su Ming feel as if he had found his mother. Perhaps there was a deep sense of guilt contained within that motherly love, but there was one thing that even Su Xianyi and Lei Chun would never know. Su Ming had once spared Su Xian when he was in the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World. Even if he had seen through Su Xianyi's plan to use him to get rid of some of the negative effects, he still did not kill him. Some of this was because of Lei Chun, but most of it was because of the woman in the fifth kiln who Su Ming had always believed to be his mother. It was because of her that Su Ming had chosen to give up on his hatred towards Su Xianyi. Even if that woman had closed her eyes in the empty galaxy, she had still held him in her arms when he was still a baby. The warmth she had shown him was something Su Ming could never forget. She was not his mother, but in Su Ming's heart, that woman was also his mother. Even though she had done it out of guilt, and because she wanted to leave a path of retreat for her true child, no matter what, Su Ming could not forget what he had experienced in the past. That was why he had only returned the fifth kiln to Su Xianyi and ended his time of sighing softly. When he turned around, he sealed everything away. At that moment, when he returned to the place where he had once risen to power, Su Ming shook his head and walked towards Black Ink Planet. The families in the planet had also gone through changes during the 1,000-something years. Their former glory had become dull, and the inconspicuous ones in the past had perhaps reached the peak at that moment. Su Ming walked through Black Ink Planet, walked past city after city, walked past race after race, and continued walking through Black Ink Planet until he arrived at the city that once belonged to the Berserkers. He stood outside an inn in the bustling street and looked at the cultivators around him, and Su Ming seemed to have found some of the feelings he had in the past. When he lifted his head, sunlight shone into Su Ming's eyes. A light breeze lifted his long hair, and his robes fluttered gently. At that moment, Su Ming did not look tall or built. Instead, he had the air of a scholar around him, but in truth, it was a kind of elegance, a kind of otherworldly air, a kind of aloofness that would make him stand apart from the world if he wanted to. Yet now, when Su Ming saw the name of a restaurant under the sun, he stopped moving, and nostalgia appeared in his eyes. 1,000 years ago, these 3 simple words were the name of the inn. The words on the signboard also had a hint of age to them, as if they were a testament to how ancient and real those 3 words were. Su Ming smiled faintly and walked into the inn. The moment he entered, an innkeeper immediately came up to him. Perhaps it was because of Su Ming's otherworldly air, but the innkeeper did not dare to be inattentive to him. He guided him to a table near the window and brought him a pot of wine as well as a few side dishes. When he saw that Su Ming still did not speak, he took his leave to serve other customers. Su Ming sat there and savored his wine, as if he had truly returned to 1,000 years ago. In the afternoon, when the sun shone through the window, it shone on Su Ming's face as if it wanted to fuse his body with the sunlight. When others looked over, they could only see a gentle light. They could not see Su Ming's face. He's here. Haha, it's time. Innkeeper, hurry up and invite Mr. Chen over. We're all spoiling him. That's right. Hurry up and invite Senior Chen over. Last time, he told us about the dual fiends, the crane and the black from 1,000 years ago. We don't know what happened in the end. Once the number of customers in the inn increased, a clamor slowly spread through the inn. The innkeeper quickly bowed with his hands in front of his chest. Once he voiced his agreement, he strode into the inner room. Before long, he supported an old man in a white robe with a head full of white hair and walked out slowly. Once the old man appeared, the noise in the inn immediately died down. Almost everyone's gazes were on the old man at that moment. There were even some clever employees who brought over a chair for the old man to sit on. He coughed a few times, and when his ancient gaze swept past the crowd, it landed on Su Ming. He seemed to have paused for a moment, but soon he looked away. Where was I last time? The old man touched the cup of water placed by the employee beside him and asked with a smile. He seemed to be full of energy, but when he spoke, his voice sounded a little hoarse. Senior Chun, don't be so forgetful. Last time, you said that the dual fiends, the black and the yellow, had angered quite a number of families by cheating them in a marriage, and they're being hunted down. What dual fiends? It's clearly the crane and the black fiends. It doesn't matter what the dual fiends are. Senior Chun, you said that last time. Then became noisy once again, and quite a number of people spoke while laughing. The dual fiends are being hunted down by many families, but they aren't bothered by it. The crane is skilled in transformation, and it has turned into an old man in many of the family cities. The old man stroked his beard and began speaking languidly. He spoke slowly, but his descriptions were incredibly realistic. Soon, his words attracted the attention of the people around him, and laughter could occasionally be heard. That's right. My master once said that he was once tricked by an old man with the air of an immortal into buying a few fake medicinal cores in a city. That's right. I've heard about this as well, but it's said that the dual fiends have a great background. Su Ming continued drinking and listened to the old man's slow narration. Gradually, a smile appeared on his lips. Just like that, the last person the dual fiends ran into was actually their master. That's why, in fear, they tried to flee, but in the end, they did not manage to escape. The old man picked up the cup of water and took a sip before he spoke with a smile. Who is the master of the dual fiends? This is the first time I've heard of this. Senior Chun, how did you learn about it? When the old man finished speaking, a ruckus rose in the inn once more. When the old man raised his hand and made a light gesture, the ruckus slowly died down. I'll tell you more today. You should have heard about the master of the dual fiends before. There was a person who walked out of divine essence Star Ocean in the past. This person rose to power in divine essence Star Ocean, took away the fifth kiln, spread out the kiln's flames, and burned the entire galaxy. He also fought against all the races beyond the fifth ocean, and a large number of Almighties died in his hands. Even the Almighties in Mastery Realm died because of him, and even the powerful warriors in Fate Realm were not his opponent. Dao Kong? Senior, are you talking about Dao Kong? Someone in the inn immediately asked. Nostalgia appeared on Su Ming's face. This name had been buried in his memories, and when he remembered it now, it had been too long. It's Dao Kong, but it's also not Dao Kong. Very few people know his name. Even I only know that his surname is Su. It's said that he was once an abyss builder from the fifth true world. This person possessed Dao Kong and went to divine essence Star Ocean. The dual fiends were by his side, and they swept through the barren lands of divine essence, stirred up the kiln's flames, and subdued all the alien races. They killed countless people, and when he left the barren lands of divine essence, he left behind his legend. It is said that he went to true morning Dao world. When the old man said those words, the inn instantly fell silent. Everything that had happened in true morning Dao world, including the fall of morning Dao sect, the appearance of the gap in Era Triad, and even the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire slaughtering their way into the barren lands of divine essence. If it was not because this place was incredibly barren, it might have also descended into the flames of war. It's said that a sect known as the Ninth Summit rose to power in true morning Dao world when Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire descended with the greatest intensity. This matter had happened a long time ago, so it was only natural that news of it had spread to this place. It said that the strongest person in Ninth Summit also has the surname Su. When the old man said those words, he started coughing. A waiter by the side went up to support him, and the old man smiled apologetically at the crowd. I'm sorry, everyone. My injuries are acting up again, and I can't talk for long. Thank you for coming to support me today. 2 days later, I will continue telling you the story from 1,000-something years ago. Almost at the same time, the old man stood up. A smile appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. The old man's appearance made him remember a person from the past. It's rare to meet an old friend. Su Ming put down his wine cup, stood up, and walked towards the door of the inn. At the moment he walked out, the old man smiled apologetically at the crowd, and by coincidence, he saw Su Ming. This time, there was no sunlight, so he saw Su Ming's full face. The old man shuddered, and disbelief appeared on his face. In fact, the old man's appearance changed at that moment. It was as if he was no longer an old man, but an old woman with white hair. However, due to certain reasons, she could only show the appearance of an old man to the outside world. When my beauty turns white, it will be as if I've been waiting for 1,000 years, gathering all my thoughts to train and exchange for the sacred deities of sun and moon to stay. It won't last long. Su Ming's sentimental voice reached the old woman's ears. As Su Ming left into the distance, the old woman cast her gaze towards the table where he had been sitting. She saw a medicinal core placed beside the wine cup. When Su Ming left into the distance, the person who looked like an old man stared at the door of the inn in a daze. After a long while, a complicated expression appeared on his face. He sighed softly, and when he lifted his right hand, the medicinal core flew towards him and landed on his palm. At that moment, the people in the inn gradually noticed something, and they looked towards the old man curiously. Senior Chun, who was that fellow Taoist just now? Someone quickly asked. He's the person I mentioned just now. The old woman who was disguised as an old man sighed softly and mumbled. The scenes of the past rose in her mind. At that time, she still had her youth in her face, but now her old friend was as good as new, and she was already old. Today, the author of The Art of Begging for Art's cover was originally known as Cucumber's Mustard, but now known as No_Understand. She was the owner and the lady boss of the tea house. This was the grand occasion of her life, the wedding where she would walk from being single to practicing dual cultivation. She wished mustard and wished that she and her partner a happy and harmonious life. Chapter 1478. On the land of Black Ink Planet, Lai Shanxiu had once stared at the mountain in the distance. On that day, Su Ming appeared in the place once again. 1,000-something years had passed since then. When he stood in the place again and looked into the distance, Su Ming felt as if he could see himself. After a long while, he took a step forward with a calm expression and walked into space, disappearing from Black Ink Planet. He stepped into the galaxy and entered Divine Essence Star Ocean. The barren lands of Divine Essence remained the same, and everything in the galaxy remained the same. Perhaps it was not something that would never change, but while the 1,000-something years might have seemed long to Su Ming, to Divine Essence Star Ocean, it was perhaps just a small part of its life. Su Ming walked past the nest of flame fiends' progenitor and the habitats of the ferocious beasts in the star abyss until he arrived at the continent where Tian Xiezi's disciple, in name, had once resided. It was just that this place was no longer the same, but the people had changed. It was a wasteland, and it was unknown how many years it had been abandoned. He was no longer here. Perhaps his clansmen were no longer here as well. All traces of him had been erased a long time ago. After all, this was the Abyss Star Sea. The cruelty and slaughter here would often occur between clansmen. Su Ming remained silent for a long time before he turned around and left. He walked into Divine Essence Star Ocean and arrived at Husband Gazing Mountain. When he reached the region where the sand earthlings were, he once again saw the giant floating head statue. Su Ming arrived at the top of Husband Gazing Mountain and saw a mountain rock with a woman's figure erected there. That rock seemed to have been formed naturally, and from the distance, it looked like a woman who was staring into the distance and waiting for her husband's return. As he stared at the mountain rock, Su Ming remembered Zhu Yu Kai, who was in Husband Gazing Mountain. He also remembered the bald crane's complicated expression when it was in this place. At that moment, when he scrutinized the mountain rock, Su Ming suddenly noticed that the woman formed by the mountain rock seemed to be somewhat similar to the woman he had seen when the bald crane had stared at the lake for 100 years. This was purely a feeling. In silence, Su Ming looked at the mountain rock that looked like a woman's figure, and he felt as if he could hear a soft murmur that came from the passage of time. The moonlight was dim. Who was reminiscing? Gazing at the horizon, thinking of my hometown. Su Ming stared at the mountain rock and left. This mountain had its own story, and it had happened a long time ago. He had been staring at it, and perhaps he would only be able to see it during the final 100 years. Su Ming walked through the desert in the sand earthlings territory and picked up a handful of sand. He had once promised the sand earthling spirit that he would give him eternity. It was just like the Old Man Extermination's ballad in the past. All the lives who were written into the ballad could live forever in their aeon. With the handful of sand in his palm as a guide, Su Ming closed his eyes, and the sand on his palm immediately shuddered. It instantly floated up from Su Ming's palm and spun around to turn into a figure made of sand. After a long while, when Su Ming opened his eyes, the figure wrapped its fist in its palm and bowed deeply towards him. Then he flew up and swung his right hand at the sky. A vortex appeared out of nowhere, and the figure turned into a long arc that charged into the vortex, gradually disappearing without a trace. As Su Ming watched her leave into the distance, and when the vortex disappeared, he fulfilled another promise he had made in the past. Su Ming walked through the paths he had once taken and saw herds of ferocious beasts. Since he was already there, he would go to the fifth ocean and see whether there was truly a path that led to the broken fifth true world. He still had the wish he had in the past, but he could not find his junior brother, Tian Xiezi's disciple in name. This was a regret, but Su Ming did not force it. In truth, with his current level of cultivation, when he saw the wasteland and fell silent, he had already sensed that his junior brother, Tian Xiezi's disciple in name, had already returned to dust. It was difficult for them to meet each other again. This was the fate of different people, and Su Ming could not interfere with it. But perhaps it was destined that he would be able to make up for this regret. As he moved forward in Divine Essence Star Ocean, Su Ming's footsteps came to a halt. After that, he slowly turned his head around. When he looked into the distance, a dark look gradually appeared on his face, and killing intent appeared in it. Ever since he returned from the fourth expanse cosmos, killing intent had practically never appeared on Su Ming's body. This was the first time. He saw a floating continent not too far away from where he was. At that moment, all the lives on that continent were in a terrible state. Blood flowed in rivers, and all of them were killed by a thin old man with an expressionless face. It was as if he was using his slaughter to absorb the fear and the life force they once had when they died. As he killed, the thin old man's presence became stronger. There was a skeleton on the old man's back. At that moment, the flesh and blood on that skeleton squirmed. It seemed like the more he killed, the more he could recover from the rot. He could regrow flesh from his bones. In fact, there were some parts of his body that had already grown new skin. This scene made Su Ming remember one of Su Xianyi's clones in the past. He had also been trapped somewhere in Divine Essence Star Ocean and had become the host of the skeleton on his back. It was the same skeleton, but the host was no longer Su Xianyi's clone. Instead, he had become Tian Xiezi's disciple in name, who Su Ming had searched for but could not find his junior brother. As he stared at the old man, Su Ming fell silent. He could not ignore this matter. The presence spreading out from the skeleton made it clear that he was a powerful warrior from one of the Eons. Su Ming would not have bothered with him regardless of whether that person killed or absorbed. This was part of the rules before the disaster, and Su Ming did not want to interfere with it. But this person should not have used Tian Xiezi's disciple in name as his host. There was a saying in the past that those who did not know were not guilty, but this saying was not true for Su Ming. Regardless of whether he knew or did not know, there were certain things that once he did, he would have to pay the price, such as the powerful warriors from one of the Eons. Su Ming lifted his right hand and pointed at the galaxy in the distance. With it, the galaxy immediately distorted, and without a single sound, an illusory figure appeared in front of Su Ming. It was the shadow of his finger, and it instantly looked real. When it gathered together, it became 1,000 feet big, and it charged into the distance with a loud whistle. As it moved forward, its size changed again. It turned into a finger that was nearly 10,000 feet big. It sliced through space and instantly appeared in the sky above the continent. It charged towards a corpse on the ground who was absorbing the life force at that moment and pressed down. At that moment, the continent trembled furiously, as if it could not withstand the indescribable destructive will stirred up when Su Ming's finger descended from the sky. It was especially so for the corpse. He originally had his eyes closed, but at that moment, he opened them to reveal yellow pupils. They shrank swiftly, and shock appeared on his face. Which fellow Taoist attacked me? If you have taken a liking to this continent beforehand, I will immediately apologize and offer you all the life force I absorbed. I will also offer you a supreme treasure as an apology. When the corpse spoke, Su Ming's finger in the sky did not stop moving. It replaced the sky and descended. The ground trembled. In fact, the edges of the continent started shattering and crumbling, as if they could not withstand the mighty pressure. This scene caused the corpse's expression to change again. Without any hesitation, he opened his mouth and sucked in a sharp breath. With it, the old man on his back was reduced to skin and bones. He turned into a mummy, as if all his flesh and blood had been absorbed by the corpse. When the mummy, which had long since died and turned into a puppet, fell to the ground, flesh and blood grew rapidly on the corpse's body. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a middle-aged man. There was a strange and malicious look on his face. At that moment, he threw his head back and roared. When he formed a seal with his hands, he pushed towards the incoming finger from the sky. Almost at the instant he attacked, a gigantic shadow appeared around the middle-aged man. That shadow was in the form of a huge, rotting beast. It had 9 heads, and its body swelled up to several thousands of feet in size. It let out a roar filled with unwillingness to admit defeat and charged towards Su Ming's finger. Damn it! No matter who you are, you can't kill me. This is a part of the laws. Since you can't kill me, why bother interfering with me? As the old man roared, Su Ming's finger crashed into the old man's body in midair. A loud bang instantly spread out in a manner that shook the sky and earth. Hidden beneath, it was the old man's shrill screams of pain. From the distance, Su Ming's finger replaced the sky and the universe. When he descended, he covered nearly 2/10 of the continent with just that one finger. Once he touched the huge beast that the old man had manifested, Su Ming's finger did not stop moving. In fact, it could be said that he pushed the old man's body and pressed it against the continent that no longer had any life left. Boom, boom, boom. The ground trembled, and cracks instantly filled the entire continent. In just the span of a few breaths, the entire continent crumbled, and it did not just crumble in one go. Instead, as it shattered layer by layer, it exploded and turned into ashes. Even the old man's body was destroyed by the finger formed by Su Ming's will. He was completely wiped off the face of the earth. I can't bring you to the other side of the world. Since you've already returned to dust, the only thing I can do is to bury this person with you. I will use this continent that no longer has any life to build your tomb. Su Ming sighed softly. He lifted his right hand for a moment, and the continent that had been reduced to ashes gathered together from space to form an ancient tomb floating in the galaxy. There was a tombstone on it, and a row of words gradually appeared on it. Ninth Summit, Emo Shah's tomb. Djiao Emo Shah was once Tian Xiezi's disciple in name. At that moment, he was sleeping eternally in the tomb. He had not interacted much with Su Ming, but Su Ming had never forgotten this junior brother of his. However, it was inevitable that the emotions in his heart could not compare to those of his eldest senior brother and the others. In fact, Tian Xiezi might have even forgotten that there was once a boy in this place who persistently wanted to become his disciple. But no matter what, he was Su Ming's junior brother. Even if the tomb could only exist for 100 years, the words Ninth Summit had already spoken of the regret that had risen in Su Ming's heart. There's still the third chapter left. Please support me with your monthly votes. Chapter 1479. There was no longer any fog beyond the fifth ocean. Su Ming stood there and stared at it quietly for a long time before he lifted his foot and walked inside. 1 year later, Su Ming did not return because there was no longer any need for him to do so. He opened his eyes while meditating in true morning Tao world. The scenes in his pupils remained in his eyes, and if anyone took a closer look, they would find that he was looking at a wasteland and a galaxy. That was the fifth true world. Su Ming went to Divine Essence Star Ocean and found the entrance to the fifth true world. In the wasteland that had been sealed for a long time, he found the place where Su Zhan had died in the past. Once he walked past everything, his eyes gradually calmed down, and the quiet ninth sect was reflected in them once more. The final 100 years. Su Ming said softly and closed his eyes. During these 100 years, he would prepare for the final battle against Arid Triad. The battle of possession 100 years later had nothing to do with any grudges. It did not matter whether it was Harmonious Morris Alba or Arid Triad. They were both fighting for the sake of survival. The number of true worlds is no longer meaningful. The main point of this battle is our will and our determination to live. Su Ming lifted his head and cast a glance at space before he gradually closed his eyes. The moment he did so, his figure appeared in the world of All Spirits Hall in true Morning Tao world. Su Ming sat down cross-legged in what was once Great Berserker tribe and began his spirit ascension, which was a cycle of 100 years. This time, Su Ming wanted to become an ancestral spirit 100 years later. Everything was being prepared for Arid Triad's disaster to arrive 100 years later, and the disaster would destroy them. Time passed. Year after year, the tremors in Arid Triad expanse cosmos grew stronger. In fact, there were quite a number of regions where the galaxy seemed to have become thinner. It was as if there was another world under the galaxy, and it was slowly approaching. Countless lives wandered about. A large amount of plants withered. All the ferocious beasts with sentient spirits were filled with fear, as if they had noticed that the end of their lives was about to come, and the world was about to be destroyed. However, the spirit aura in all of Arid Triad had erupted swiftly during the 100 years. It was as if it was a form of release, but it was also like the final radiance of a person who was about to die. As the spirit aura erupted, lives withered, and a large number of powerful warriors from the previous eons surged forth. The entire world sank into chaos. In this chaos, life was no longer life. It was so fragile that it couldn't even withstand a single blow. The cycle of life and death was so numerous that it made people numb. The experts of the previous eons who had awakened brought their cruelty and their different interests to vent as much as they wanted in these 100 years. It was as if they wanted to release all the loneliness that had been dormant in these short 100 years. All of Arid Triad was plunged into chaos. There was no order there, no mercy. To survive, people could give up on all their dignity. To obtain a medicinal core, they could give up on everything. In fact, the powerful warriors from the previous eons would often fight against each other with arts, causing Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos to become even more chaotic. Every year, a large number of lives would disappear, and when planets began to be submerged by the galaxy, when the distortions in the galaxy turned into ripples that appeared on a large scale, the chaos and madness became stronger. Arid Triad was not the only one affected. It was the same for Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire. With Yin Pei and the others' levels of cultivation, it was impossible for them to stop this from happening. They could only watch as everything continued and watch Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire sink in endless chaos. Only true Morning Dao World, the Expanse Cosmos where Su Ming was, had this sort of thing happen. Gradually, when nearly 3/10 of the 100 years had passed, a large number of cultivators surged into true Morning Dao World. These cultivators were all refugees. Their homes and sects had already been destroyed, and their lives were no longer in their control. Some of them had come to true Morning Dao World only to discover that the powerful warriors chasing after them had hesitated. They did not continue chasing after them, and true Morning Dao World seemed to have turned into a paradise in the apocalypse. Gradually, more cultivators surged into true Morning Dao World. They searched for various places to stay in true Morning Dao World, and they discovered that true Morning Dao World was as calm as ever in the world that had suddenly become chaotic. There were no attacks from powerful enemies, and neither were there any threats to their lives. Everything in the world was passing by just as they remembered it. They did not know the reason, but as time passed, and when half of the 100 years had passed, the rumors of true Morning Dao World being a paradise spread to even more people, especially the cultivators who were safe in true Morning Dao World. They used all sorts of methods to tell their family and friends that they should think of all sorts of ways to come to this place. After all, this was the safest place in the chaotic world. On that day, in the galaxy near true Morning Dao World and true Sacredine World were two cultivators, a man and a woman. They were moving swiftly through the galaxy. The woman had a little girl on her back. She looked to be about 5 or 6 years old, and there was terror on her face, but she did not cry. The woman was clearly injured, but she gritted her teeth and persevered. The man beside her was clearly the little girl's father, the woman's husband. The two of them were silent, but they used their fastest speed to head towards true Morning Dao World. Even if they continuously swallowed medicinal cores, they still maintained their speed. We'll be there soon. With a little more time, we'll be able to enter true Morning Dao World. My senior brother will be waiting for us there. As long as we get there, we'll be safe. The man looked at his wife, then at his daughter. Determination appeared on his face, and he continuously told himself that he had to bring his family into true Morning Dao World. The woman's face was pale, but she still had a gentle smile on her face. She held the man's hand, and when they saw the determination on each other's faces, they became even faster. In truth, they could travel even faster, but the child on the woman's back was too young. They needed to spread out their cultivation bases to protect her, which was why they could no longer increase their speed. Time passed, and several hours went by. When they could already see the broken barrier of true Morning Dao World in front of them, they saw a middle-aged man waiting anxiously. Once he saw them, Delight immediately appeared on the man's face. The barrier in the past was now riddled with holes. In truth, it could be said that it no longer existed, and people could enter and leave at will. The couple's spirits were lifted, and they instantly closed in on the barrier. With a flash, they stepped into true morning Tao world from true serene world and gathered with the middle-aged man who had come to receive them. Haha, you're safe now. Once you're here, you'll be safe. Come, I'll bring you to meet Master. He's been thinking about you all these days. As the middle-aged man spoke happily, a sinister laugh suddenly echoed through the galaxy. As the laughter rang out, the joyful expressions of the husband and wife immediately changed. As the laughter echoed in the air, a figure walked out from the void. It was an old man, a black-robed old man holding a large banner in his hand. His appearance not only caused the expressions of the husband and wife to change, but even the expression of the middle-aged man who had been speaking changed greatly. You sure run fast. Oh well, I won't make things difficult for you today. Leave the child behind, and you can leave, the old man said flatly. The three people who had already stepped into true morning Tao world cast each other a glance, then immediately turned into three long arcs and left. Don't worry, once we're here, that person won't chase after us. This place is safe, the middle-aged man said resolutely. When the three of them left into the distance, the old man outside the barrier let out a cold harumph. He seemed to be slightly hesitant, but as he let out that cold harumph, he still moved and stepped into true morning Tao world. Even though there had always been a warning circulating among the powerful warriors of the previous eons. It was a warning that told everyone not to take even half a step into true morning Tao world. They had been cautious over the years. However, 50 years had passed, and a large number of cultivators had surged into true morning Tao world, and gradually, their caution was no longer as great. Once I step in, I'll immediately kill these three people and come back. It won't take much time, so I should be fine. At the instant the old man stepped into true morning Tao world, he lifted his right hand and pointed forward. The woman who was charging forward immediately froze. As she trembled, she could not move even a single inch. When tears fell from her eyes, the eyes of the man beside her turned bloodshot. He let out a roar, but when the old man pointed at him, he felt as if his entire body had been imprisoned. The middle-aged man's body also froze. Along with the couple, their bodies were dragged back as if they were seized by a huge hand from the void. Do you think you'll be safe now that you're here? Before me, there is no place in the world that is safe for you. As the old man spoke arrogantly, he made a grabbing motion with his right hand. Despair appeared on the faces of the three people, and he was just about to crush them to death and extract their souls, as well as crush the little girl he wanted to refine into a flag spirit, Uncle. The girl behind the woman suddenly looked at the galaxy and spoke with a smile. Her voice was very clear. When she said those words, the fear on her face disappeared, and an innocent smile appeared on her face. Su Ming stood behind the old man. He stared at the girl and smiled faintly. When Su Ming smiled, the entire world became still and unmoving. The old man still retained his arrogance. When Su Ming lifted his right hand and swung his arm, his body jolted, and he instantly fell backwards. He turned into a long arc and was swept out of true morning Tao world. A loud bang reverberated in all directions in true serene world, and his body and soul were destroyed. Even when he died, he still retained his arrogant expression. Once Su Ming finished doing all of this, he disappeared. The world returned to normal, and the power imprisoning the trio disappeared, allowing them to return to normal. However, their expressions soon changed drastically. They stared at everything in a daze. They did not see Su Ming, and neither did they know what had happened. However, the old man who had terrified them was no longer around. An uncle came just now, the girl lying on her mother's back said in a clear voice. Tomorrow, it would still be the third watch. Chapter 1480. It was the final 50 years before the disaster. It was just like the darkness of dawn before Tongli. It was the beginning and end of all darkness in the world. At that moment, Erythriad was in that state. 50 years was half a mortal's life, but to cultivators, it might just be the blink of an eye. But the powerful warriors of the previous eons who had woken up did not want those 50 years to be just the blink of an eye. They wanted to completely erupt with the madness they had accumulated and release all their desires to their heart's content. They would then accompany the world into the disaster. And once the disaster was over, they would squander away their desires for another 100 years in the new world they believed would appear. Then, they would fall into deep sleep and wait for the disaster of the new aeon to wake up once more. This was their fate, an endless cycle of epics and epics. It was as if there would be no end to it. Even they themselves believed it to be so. Few people knew that, in fact, this catastrophe didn't just affect all living things, it also affected themselves. Flowers blooming and wilting were fated. The power of the petals blooming was also the desire to fall. When the petals withered and fell to the ground, how many people could imagine just how many bees and butterflies would be attracted to the flower and be reluctant to part with it? One cycle of life and death, one Tao. As time passed, more powerful warriors of the previous eons surged into Dark Dawn, Saint Defier, and Erythriad. No matter how crazed they were in Dark Dawn and Saint Defier's camps, they seemed to hold back a little. They did not reach their full potential. At most, they were temperamental and killed a lot. But in arid triad expanse cosmos, the people who had intruded into it were the ones who had woken up from their slumber. They seemed to be even more casual and crazed. They killed, possessed others, refined others, used them as furnaces, and all sorts of evil deeds filled all of Erythriad. They were arrogant because they believed that no one could kill them. They were crazed because over the course of countless years, they could no longer be called cultivators. Instead, they had become a part of the disaster. Only a handful of powerful warriors could remain clear-headed and believe that they were not ferocious beasts but cultivators. This sort of people rarely ventured out, and they were usually the same as the boy. During the 100 years, they remained the same as before. Su Ming originally did not want to pay much attention to the powerful warriors of the previous eons. It did not matter whether they killed or committed heinous acts. It was the final release of their lives. It did not matter whether it was all lives or the galaxy. During the final 50 years, the world turned into chaos and the apocalypse arrived, and all of it was just an interlude before the main theme was about to begin. With Su Ming's personality, as long as he did not step into true Morning Tao world and did not disturb his isolation to prepare to fight against Erythriad, he would not pay much attention to the changes in the powerful warriors of the previous eons, because in Su Ming's eyes, they were in truth just like ants. The difference in their state of being and the difference in their realms caused Su Ming's gaze to be different when he looked at the world. Even though the powerful warriors from the previous eons were also in Avicania realm, and were only 1 or 2 realms away from Su Ming. Su Ming had understood his Tao, and they had given up on the possibility of understanding it. Su Ming did not stop the people who fled to true Morning Tao world to seek refuge. All lives had a chance to live, and they chose this place. They chose to live in peace for 50 years, and that was their choice. However, Su Ming had underestimated the madness and arrogance of the powerful warriors of the previous eons. He originally thought that if he chased the old man out of true Morning Tao world and destroyed his body and soul, it would serve as a warning. After all, Su Ming had killed far too many people in his life. During the 50 years before the world was destroyed, all lives were bound to die, and Su Ming did not want to snatch too many lives from the disaster. The old man let out a shrill roar before he died, and it had indeed caused quite a number of powerful warriors from the previous eons to be apprehensive, but at the same time, excitement and agitation that they could not control erupted from them. They were excited, incredibly excited, and their excitement was so great that bloodlust appeared in their eyes. It had been a long time since they felt like they could die. If a soul had died for a long time, it would long for life. And if a living person had lived for a long time, they would long for death. This did not mean that they longed for death. Instead, they were infatuated with the feeling of their blood flowing faster when they were caught between life and death. They knew a long time ago that there was a powerful existence in true Morning Tao world. That place was his territory, and he did not allow outsiders to step into it. When the 100 years had just passed, the first batch of powerful warriors from the previous eons had sensed Su Ming's divine thought, which was why they had spread word of it, and that was why the 50 years of peace had lasted for them. Yet when the old man died, the peace was broken. While they were excited, many of the powerful warriors from the previous eons saw the arrogant attitude of Su Ming's true Morning Tao world as a form of provocation. After all, those who could survive the disaster eons were all prodigies and outstanding talents. They were also people who had great fortuitous encounters. They refused to submit to each other, and it was even more so for Su Ming, who they had never seen before and was hiding in true Morning Tao world. 3 years after the old man's death, nearly 100 powerful warriors from the previous eons led the 3 old monsters who had lived for the longest time and stepped into true Morning Tao world on a large scale for the first time. Nearly 100 of them were in the middle stage of Avacania realm. As for the 3 old men, they were almost at the peak of the middle stage of Avacania realm. On the day 3 years later, they stepped into true Morning Tao world from a spot near true Sacredine world, the spot where the old man had died. There might only be 100 of them, but in truth, at that moment, most of the powerful warriors from the previous eons in Eritrea were paying attention to it through different methods. In fact, they had even set up a bet and treated this as a drama in their lives. It would become a beautiful memory in the short amount of time they had left when they woke up. When nearly 100 powerful warriors stepped in a true Morning Tao world, a ripple that looked like a violent gust of wind swept through the entire true Morning Tao world. It swiftly spread out and swept through all of true Morning Tao world, causing the hearts of the cultivators hiding in true Morning Tao world to tremble. Terror and despair appeared on their faces. They did not know whether this place could still be considered paradise. The nearly 100 powerful presences turned into a windstorm when the ripples swept through the area. It became stronger with each passing moment, and strange roars reverberated in the air with malice and arrogance. At that moment, Su Ming opened his eyes in Ninth Summit sect. "Baldy, take this and wipe off these people," Su Ming said faintly. By his side, the bald crane, which was already bored to death, immediately became full of energy and started crying out. Its eyes shone brightly, and excitement appeared in them. "Crystals! Crystals! These people have lived for so long, they must have a lot of crystals on them." The bald crane's eyes sparkled. In its excitement, it saw Su Ming swing his arm, and a wooden stick the size of a palm immediately floated in front of it. "What's this?" The bald crane was momentarily stunned. It thought that Su Ming would bring out some sort of astonishing treasure, but when it looked at it, the wooden stick was incredibly normal. There was nothing special about it. You only need to knock this against a random person, and that person will be wiped off. As Su Ming spoke, he closed his eyes again and immersed himself in gaining an epiphany while training. He wanted to ensure that he would be at the peak of his condition 50 years later when he faced all the disasters and destruction. All right, the bald crane was full of energy. It grabbed the wooden stick, and as it cackled strangely, it moved and turned into a long arc that charged into the distance. It sliced through space and fled into the galaxy. To the powerful warriors of the previous eons, this was a game, but to the bald crane, it was also a game. However, once it cleared the game, it would obtain a large amount of crystals. This reward was enough to make the bald crane descend into madness. It let out strange cries and acted arrogantly. It was so fast that it surpassed its previous limit. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that there was no limit to the bald crane. With a sufficient amount of crystals, it could bring out an almost limitless explosive power. There are not many planets in true Morning Tao world. Most of them were floating continents. At that moment, the near 100 powerful warriors turned into 100 long arcs and charged over from one of the continents. There are quite a number of living beings here. Huh, Don't fight with me over this place. This is mine. I will refine this continent and all the living beings on it, and turn them into parts of my enchanted treasure." An old man's laughter immediately echoed in the air from among the 100 people. With one move, he charged towards the continent. When he lifted his right hand, white flames instantly appeared on his palm. They seemed to be able to melt the galaxy, and when he flung his arm, they spread out towards the continent beneath him. The others in the area watched with smiles on their faces. No one came forward to snatch the continent. In fact, the old man could already foresee that he would hear countless shrill screams of pain in the next breath, and the continent would be refined into parts of his enchanted treasure. Yet at the instant the flames were about to descend, and the cultivators on the continent sank into despair, the bald crane walked out from the space under the flames. It had its head held high and an incredibly arrogant expression on its face. Once it appeared, it lifted its claw, and a log of wood immediately flew out to charge towards the flames. At the instant they collided, there was not much of a boom. The flames trembled and collapsed in an instant, but the wooden stick did not stop. It pierced through the flames, and in the next breath, it appeared before the old man, who had a shocked expression on his face. It only touched him lightly. That touch caused the galaxy to fall into dead silence. The old man's body was instantly reduced to a pulp when the log of wood that was only the size of a palm touched him. His flesh and blood crumbled, and his form and soul were destroyed. When the galaxy fell silent, the bald crane was also shocked by the wooden stick's strength, but soon it snapped out of its stupor. A thought appeared in its head, and it immediately turned into an old man with the air of an immortal. With a prideful smile on his face, he said flatly, "I am the bald crane. I heard that the cultivators on this continent are willing to pay 1,000,000 crystals to avoid the disaster today. Is this true?" As it spoke, the bald crane lowered its head and looked at the cultivators on the continent with an indifferent expression. The first chapter was a desperate plea for monthly votes. Chapter 1481. There's such a thing. We're willing to give you 5,000,000 crystals. Senior, please help us. Someone among the cultivators on the continent immediately registered what was going on and quickly shouted out loudly. At that moment, the other cultivators snapped out of their shock and quickly spoke up. The bald crane had the air of an immortal and looked as if it regarded crystals as dirt. It shook its head and sighed. "Oh well, I've never cared about worldly possessions. My level of cultivation is before arid triads, so there's no way I would place any importance on crystals. But since you're all sincere, fine, I'll help you this once." When the bald crane spoke faintly, it was already incredibly excited in its heart. It wanted to see the 5,000,000 crystals immediately, but not a single hint of it showed on its face. It stared at the powerful warriors from the previous eons who had fallen silent because of the old man's death. "Sir, are you the master of true Morning Tao world?" The purple-robed old man, with a red face among the 3 leaders of the near 100 powerful warriors from the previous eons, asked languidly, while staring at the bald crane. "One question, and I'll attack once." The bald crane swung its arm with an incredibly arrogant look, but it was even more excited in its heart. It had been incredibly envious of Su Ming when he first saw him do this, and, at that moment, it was finally its turn to be arrogant. It's a pity that the Abyss Dragon isn't around, or else it would definitely idolize me. The bald crane lifted its chin. It looked like an immortal. Even though it was infatuated with its own self-satisfaction, it did not forget to lift its right hand and swing its arm. Immediately, the wooden stick shone again and disappeared. A shrill scream of pain rang out, and the wooden stick returned to the bald crane's side. Another powerful warrior from the previous eons was reduced to a bloody mess. When he disappeared, his body and soul were destroyed. Ahem, I can somewhat be considered the master of true Morning Tao world. The bald crane stroked its beard and tried its best to make itself look as indifferent as possible. The near 100 powerful warriors from the previous eons stared at the bald crane. They fell silent, and some of them began moving back. Even the 3 people in the lead did not speak again in silence. The bald crane's appearance was nothing, but the strength of the wooden stick shocked them. This treasure might seem like a normal piece of wood, but the moment anyone touched it, their body and soul would be destroyed. With these people's ruthless gazes, they could naturally tell at first glance that the item was extraordinary, and greed gradually rose in the hearts of quite a number of them. When the bald crane saw that these people had chosen to remain silent and not cooperate with it, it immediately felt displeased, but since they did not ask, it would not be nice for it to take the initiative to speak. However, because of that, it felt incredibly displeased, and it could not say the words it had prepared in its stomach, so it glared at them. "Oh well, your grandpa crane is in a good mood today. Let me tell you, I've practiced cultivation before Arid Triad. Arid Triad once knelt in front of my cave abode for 100 years, and only then did I meet him." "I did," the old man said. "Even I am in." When the old true was the words I was the I as of. His voice echoed in the air, and strange expressions appeared on the cultivators' faces. Even the powerful warriors from the previous eons in front of the bald crane did not expect that the old man would say such things. In the past, Arid Triad wanted to acknowledge me as his master. I saw his sincerity, so I did not refuse him. I told him that unless he did something that shook the world, I would definitely not take him in as my disciple. In the past, when the world was first born, I swung my arm and created all lives. In the past. The bald crane began talking nonstop. As it spoke, it beamed with delight. In fact, it gradually seemed to truly believe in its words. Its presence became even more ancient, and its heart became more excited. Attacked together. While it was immersed in its own self-indulgence, one of the three people leading the powerful warriors from the previous eon spoke. At the instant they spoke, the 100 people turned into long arcs and executed their divine abilities to charge towards the bald crane. Most of the 100 people split up and instantly surrounded the area, as if they had formed some sort of rune to trap the supreme treasure made from the wooden stick. The remaining people instantly appeared in front of the bald crane, and with an endless amount of divine abilities, they attacked together. The bald crane shuddered in fear. It was still immersed in its own self-indulgence, so when it saw so many people pouncing on it, it instinctively retreated while cursing repeatedly. It even forgot to maintain the air of an immortal. Damn it, you're just asking for death. Oh well, I see that you're all pitiful, so I won't make things difficult for you." Before the bald crane could finish speaking, a monstrous ball of fire came charging at it, causing it to scream and point at the wooden stick. At the instant it pointed at the wooden stick, the 60 powerful warriors from the previous eons surrounding it roared together. With it, the galaxy roared, and the cultivation bases of the 60 people gathered together to form an ancient rune. It turned into a huge net that suppressed the wooden stick. At that moment, a sigh came from space. Once the bald crane heard it, its spirits immediately lifted. The panic on its face disappeared, replaced by arrogance and domineeringness. It pointed at the powerful warriors from the previous eons and immediately started making a ruckus. "You're dead. How dare you attack the great bald crane? Damn it, you're really dead." The bald crane moved at that moment, and its nails returned to their original form. When it bared its teeth and brandished its claws, it looked as if it had achieved its goal. At the same time, when the sigh echoed in the air, it entered the ears of the 100 people, causing their minds to buzz, and their expressions to change at the same time. Su Ming walked over from the distance. With one step, he arrived beside the bald crane, and with his second step, he stepped into the rune formed by the 60 people and appeared by the side of the wooden stick. "Grow!" When Su Ming said those words flatly, he lifted his right hand and seized the air in the direction of the wooden stick. It immediately grew to dozens of feet long. "Grow!" When he said the second word, the wooden stick became nearly 1,000 feet long, and its original appearance was gradually revealed. "Grow!" When he said the third word, the wooden stick became 10,000 feet long. It was not a wooden stick, but the sacred wood from the fourth expanse cosmos. This is the sacred wood. This is the sacred wood. He's the person who took away the sacred wood in the past. There were quite a large number of cultivators who came from the fourth expanse cosmos. In fact, some of them had even seen Su Ming with their own eyes in the past. At that moment, shock that had never appeared before appeared on their faces. To them, this was no longer a game. The scene of Su Ming taking away the sacred wood had long since become the most shocking scene in their hearts. Su Ming's expression was calm. He lifted his right hand and seized the air. Immediately, an illusory hand appeared in front of him. It seized the 10,000 feet long sacred wood, and as it spun around, it swept past the area. When it swept past the area, the galaxy roared. Just the whistling sound alone caused quite a number of the 100 people from the previous eons to cough up blood. When they retreated in fear, Su Ming said faintly, "Grow." That was the fourth word. When he said it, the 10,000 feet long sacred wood immediately grew to 100,000 feet. As it swept past the area, it drew an arc in the shape of a semicircle. Booming sounds rang out, but they were immediately hidden by the astonishing whistling sound. Not a single one of the 100 people managed to escape. Once the sacred wood touched them, their bodies were reduced to a bloody mess and exploded. Their forms and souls were destroyed. Even the 3 old men in the lead did not manage to survive. Once the sacred wood swept past them, the world fell into dead silence. Not a single one of the 100 cultivators from the previous eon survived. This scene shocked all the cultivators on the continent behind Su Ming. Their faces turned pale, and no one knew who was the first to kneel down. Soon, all the cultivators on the continent who were paying attention to the battle knelt down and worshipped Su Ming while trembling. The bald crane quickly ran to Su Ming's side smugly. It stared at the sacred wood in envy and quickly spoke. "Master, you have endless strength, and you are wise and mighty. You are unprecedented, and no one will be able to surpass you in the future. You're like the proud sun in the sky that reaches 100,000 feet, like the bright moon in the night that makes all the stars dim. You are truly." Su Ming smiled and stared at the bald crane. His gentle gaze caused the bald crane to scratch its bald head in embarrassment. It did not continue speaking. Su Ming turned his head around and cast a glance at the continent. He swept his gaze past all the cultivators on it before his eyes landed on a little girl. He smiled gently. The girl originally did not seem to have seen him, but at that moment, she seemed to have seen him. She opened her mouth, and surprise appeared in her eyes. "Let Arid Triad have some peace during the next 50 years. Su Ming turned his head around and stared at space. As he mumbled under his breath, he took a step forward. The bald crane immediately followed behind him. It realized that it was better to follow Su Ming. With him by its side, it could be even more arrogant and smug. "Papa, it's this uncle. He was the one who chased away that bad guy in the past." Among the many cultivators worshipping Su Ming on the continent were a man and a woman. Beside them was a little girl of about 8 or 9 years old. She grabbed her mother's sleeve and spoke softly. At the same time, in the Expanse Cosmos where Tion was located in Death Vortex, in true Morning Dao world, the coffin in which he was placed no longer had a lid. The person who was originally lying inside was no longer around. At the top of the mountain in that Expanse Cosmos was Tion. He was dressed in an emperor's robe and had a crown on his head. Behind him were 7 figures that seemed to be in a state between illusion and corporeal form. "It's about time. My 7 fellow Taoists, have you made your decision?" After a long while, Tion turned around and looked at the 7 people. His expression was aloof, and his eyes seemed to contain the galaxy. When he looked at them, it was as if there was a cold-blooded soul hidden in his body. "I'm about 160 votes away from second place. Fellow Taoist, can you help me get to second place?" Chapter 1482. In Death Vortex, at the top of the mountain in this world. Tion's words reverberated in the air. As the mountain wind howled, they turned into echoes that filled this world. The 7 figures hovering between illusion and reality were silent. None of them spoke. Once Tion finished asking his question, he did not continue asking. Instead, he waited for the 7 of them to answer. He had already waited for far too many years, and he did not mind waiting a little longer. After all, the 7 of them had made this decision all those years ago, and each of them had tried it once. However, only he, Dition, had succeeded in this aeon. Time passed. When the sun was about to set in the distance, and the brown color of dusk appeared in the sky, one of the 7 figures sighed softly. Outsiders call us the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, but only we know that we are not sovereigns, nor are we emperors. We are the ones who did not follow the people of our sex to choose to create the All-Spirits Hall. They chose to sacrifice themselves to help their descendants, but we chose to help ourselves. How many eons has it been? There were hundreds of us in the past, but now they have lost themselves. They have either given up or forgotten their original wishes. They have become existences that are neither humans nor beasts. The soft sigh spread out and broke the silence in this place. There's nothing to hesitate about. Since you've surpassed all of us in this aeon, then there's no harm in giving this life and soul to you. The rightmost figure said decisively, looking up at Dition, "You've already surpassed all of us in this aeon. Remember what you promised me. If you succeed, you must resurrect me." Dition looked at the rightmost figure and nodded solemnly. "This is the oath the 8 of us once swore together. If I succeed, the first thing I will do is resurrect all of you." If that's the case, the rightmost figure threw his head back and laughed. When he lifted his right hand, he pressed it against the center of his brows without any hesitation. With a bang, his body dissipated and turned into crystalline sparks that charged towards Dition. They fused into his body, causing him to tremble. His aura increased exponentially, and he endured the pain that threatened to roar out. He looked at the other 6 people. "I really can't accept this, but I have to admit that you have indeed succeeded in this aeon, Dition. At the very least, the chances of success will be higher if we choose you. The final 50 years, huh? I'm afraid there are very few people who know about this. After all, we have calculated for a very, very long time and gathered everyone's power to find this heavenly secret," said one of the 6 with a laugh. He lifted his right hand and slapped his forehead. His body exploded with a boom, and the same crystalline light was absorbed by Dition. "It's a pity that when we carried out our plan in my aeon, we didn't run into Su Xian, neither did we run into Su Ming, much less that laughable Dao Chun who wanted to possess you due to a stroke of fate. Forget it, forget it. There's nothing to be reluctant about in this life. It's only 50 years. If you don't keep your promise, you must remember the oath we made." Booming sounds echoed in the air. 3 of the remaining 5 struck the center of their brows, and they turned into crystalline light that was instantly absorbed by Dition. Dition's body trembled even more violently. The strength of his aura continued rising non-stop, as if it had reached a critical point. A terrifying presence spread out from him. You will become an abyss builder and possess the divine abilities of an abyss builder. Dition, the current you is even more perfect than the plan we had in the past, but the chances of you succeeding in the end aren't great. You must be careful. One of the remaining 2 sighed softly and closed his eyes. His body turned into crystalline light that instantly fused into Dition's body. Then, besides Dition, there was only one person left at the top of the mountain. That figure gradually stopped distorting and was no longer indistinct and illusory. Instead, it gained corporeal form and turned into a woman. She was dressed in a palace robe, and her expression was calm. However, when she looked at Dition, gentleness appeared in her eyes. Dition was also looking at her. The 2 of them did not speak. After a long while, the woman sighed softly and spoke slowly. "For the sake of living, no one can say whether what we did was right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong to begin with. But Dition, if you fail, it will be fine, but if you succeed, remember not to make mistakes. It doesn't matter whether it's Su Xian, who you used, Su Ming, who you chose to gain an epiphany, or Old Man Extermination, who has clearly walked ahead of us and chose a path similar to ours in his expanse cosmos. It doesn't matter whether they succeed or not, but don't commit crimes. Don't become enemies with them, or else fate is an unfathomable thing, and I can't see through it. It's especially so for Su Ming. I can't see through him either. When we were in the land of berserkers, I could see his future, but when he left Divine Essence to our ocean, his life was filled with fog, a very terrifying fog. It's especially so after he returned from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire. I don't dare to divine his future. I won't be able to help you in the future. Fate is an unfathomable thing. Even if you fuse with your lifeline, it can still change. We can only respect it. I don't know whether our choice is correct, but this is the only path we can take. Once the woman spoke softly, she closed her eyes, and her body gradually disappeared, turning into a layer of crystalline light. However, that crystalline light was not absorbed by Detion's body like the others. Instead, it gathered at the center of Detion's brows and turned into a third eye that looked exactly the same as Su Ming's. At that moment, Detion's entire body trembled. He threw his head back and let out a roar that shook the heavens and earth. As he roared, tears flowed down from the corners of his eyes. No matter how emotionless he was, no matter how cold he was, among these 7 people were his senior brothers, his close friends, his master, and his lover. From then on, all those who knew of his past would either return to dust or no longer be cultivators, and those who knew of him would never know his real name. They would only know that he was Detion. I will definitely succeed. It's impossible for me to fail because the person I chose to fuse my life with is Su Ming. All of you have seen Su Ming's current success. Instead of saying that you believe in me, it would be more accurate to say that you believe in him. If he succeeds, then I will succeed because my life matrix has already fused with his. Detion's presence gradually disappeared. He lowered his head, and after a long while, when he raised it again, a presence that was incredibly similar to Su Ming's spread out from his body. Our life matrices have already fused. That's why we can't meet each other. Once we do, our life matrices will split, and he will notice it. Su Ming, you must succeed. Once you succeed, only then will we meet, and only then will I possess you. A ghastly smile appeared at the corners of Detion's lips. There's still 50 years left. It's almost time. The time is almost up. Su Xian-yi, who had disappeared in the Emperor of Abyss True World, was sitting in a floating palace in the galaxy. It looked like a huge feng shui compass, and it was incredibly strange. Lei Chen was sitting cross-legged in front of Su Xian-yi, not moving at all. His body was pierced by countless black needles, and each needle was engraved with countless runes. Su Xian-yi stared at Lei Chen, and a kindly expression appeared on his face. When he lifted his hands, he formed a seal, and like a priceless lotus, he refined Lei Chen. Lei Chen, my son, bear with it for a few more years, and we will succeed. Old Man Extermination is about to attack, and he will need my help. When I work with him, it will be the moment we rise to power. Lei Chen, you only know that your mother died because of me, but you don't know that she did it for you. And I will be willing to sacrifice everything for you 50 years later. As long as you succeed, as long as you can make the Abyss Builders reappear in the vast universe in the future, once you open the Abyss Gate, our family will be reunited. Don't blame me for making things difficult for Su Ming. Only by passing the test on him will I dare to use it on you. And only by having him nourish the seed of life extermination will we have the confidence to succeed. It's almost time. There's less than 50 years left. Determination and madness appeared on Su Xianyi's face. As he mumbled, he continued forming seals to refine Lei Chen. The 5th kiln floated above Lei Chen's head. Flames spread out from it, and they worked together with Su Xianyi's seals to start burning him. Lei Chen had his eyes closed in the flames, and he did not move. Beyond harmonious Morris Alba's world was the boundless, vast expanse. There were countless strange lives in it, and the only way for them to become strong was to make the worlds in their bodies slowly become complete until they gave birth to lives in those worlds, and then a universe was born. The vast universe seemed to be the origin of all things, and at that moment, all the strange lives in it were trembling. None of them dared to move. All of them prostrated themselves on the ground, as if they were prostrating themselves in worship. They simply allowed a huge feng shui compass to charge past them, and their bodies were torn to shreds and devoured completely. The feng shui compass shone with a dark, destructive light. The runic symbols that rose and fell shone. Each of them contained an ancient air that seemed to belong to the origin of the vast universe, and they surrounded the black-robed young man sitting on the feng shui compass. He was dressed in a long black robe and had black hair. He sat there with an aloof expression on his face, and in his right hand was a string of pearls. There were 9 of them, and at that moment, 6 of them were shining. I'm almost there. After a long while, the young man lifted his head and twirled the string of pearls in his right hand. He looked into the distance, and it was as if his gaze could pierce through the vast universe. He saw a harmonious Morris alba exuding the aura of death in the distance. Its 4 wings gradually overlapped with each other, as if it was about to close its wings and die at the final moment of its life. At the instant he saw a harmonious Morris alba, the black-robed young man's 2 fingers froze for a moment before he pinched the 7th pearl. The pearl was originally dull, but at that moment it started shining rapidly, and the shadow of a crane was revealed within it. 7th reverse spirit, you won't be able to escape, the black-robed young man said flatly. Said the black-robed young man coolly. He closed his eyes, and yet his right hand continued to grip the 7th pearl, not moving at all. There aren't many monthly votes today. Since there aren't many, then I'll erupt with all my might until the monthly votes increase. I refuse to believe that my eruption won't increase the monthly votes. I refuse to believe it. I'll continue erupting with all my might tomorrow. Chapter 1483. Almost at the instant, Su Ming killed nearly 100 powerful warriors from the previous eons with the sacred wood in true Morning Dao world, destroying both their bodies and souls. The other expanse cosmoses in arid triads, expanse cosmoses, immediately roared and trembled. The tremors did not reverberate in the expanse cosmoses, but in the hearts of the cultivators. The act of nearly 100 cultivators stepping into true Morning Dao world had long since attracted the attention of many powerful warriors from the previous eons. After all, true Morning Dao world had once sent out a warning. They might not have seemed to care about it, but in truth, no one had stepped into the expanse cosmoses to provoke them over the past 50 years. Except for the old man from a few years ago, then there were the nearly 100 powerful experts. However, their deaths and the aura emanating from the God Tree caused all of the cultivators from the previous epoch to be completely shaken and their faces to flicker. There were quite a number of them who came from the 4th expanse cosmos. In fact, they had even slept in the sacred wood before. Some of them had even personally witnessed the sacred wood being taken away. Once all their memories were connected together, they instantly formed a complete picture, causing many of them to remember the person who had taken away the sacred wood in the 4th expanse cosmos. He had shocked their hearts, and he looked as if he could not be defeated. It's him. This person is actually the terrifying existence who took away the sacred wood in the past. Damn it, the person in true Morning Dao world is that old monster. He could have gone anywhere, but why did he have to be in true Morning Dao world? Damn it, this person is ruthless and ruthless. We absolutely can't offend him. In an instant, quite a number of cultivators who had been shocked by the scene of Su Ming killing nearly 100 powerful warriors in arid triad expanse cosmos felt their hearts tremble. Shock and nervousness appeared on their faces. However, there were still quite a number of cultivators from the previous eons who had not personally witnessed the sacred wood being taken away or did not come from the 4th expanse cosmos, which is why they did not understand much about Su Ming's terror. At that moment, they might be hesitant, but most of their expressions were dark. It's better for this expanse cosmos to be a little more peaceful during these 50 years, Su Ming said faintly. Su Ming asked faintly and walked forward in true Morning Dao world. The bald crane followed behind him while flaunting its might. Su Ming's words might have been calm, but there was a chilling tone in them, which made the bald crane even more excited. He walked out of true morning Tao world and into true sacredine world. At the instant Su Ming stepped into true sacredine world, the entire true world shuddered with a bang. Ripples spread out, and a power that could make the world freeze instantly filled the entire area. Once the powerful warriors from the previous eons in this expanse cosmos noticed it, their expressions changed drastically. Even the powerful warriors with sullen expressions instantly shuddered when Su Ming released the presence of his cultivation base without holding back much of it. What they sensed was not just Su Ming's presence, but also the sacred wood's presence, which quite a number of them were familiar with. They could sense the presence of Ming. Sacredine worlds, Sacredine Ming. Expanse cosmos. Sacred Ming. True world. The appearance of that presence could stop arid triad expanse cosmos from functioning. When it spread out, it could change the universe. A black color that seemed to be able to dye everything seemed to fill space, causing all those who sensed it to feel as if they were in darkness. They could not see even a hint of light. That darkness was definitely not the darkness of night, but a darkness that made even the night sky lose its color. It was as if wherever Su Ming's will was, the sky, the earth, the stars, the planets, the void, and space would either roll away or be completely dyed by the endless darkness. As the hearts of all the powerful warriors from the previous eons in arid triad expanse cosmos trembled, Su Ming took a step forward in true sacredine world. When his foot landed, his body instantly split into 100 parts. 100 bodies with the exact same presence instantly appeared in 100 different places in true sacredine world. Some of them were on planets, some were in space, some were in the galaxy, and some were in cave abodes formed by enchanted vessels. When they appeared at the same time, they lifted their right hands, and the sacred would manifest it to become 10,000 feet long. When it swept through the area, no matter how the 100 cultivators from the previous eons roared, how shrill they were, how they fought back, how they begged for mercy, how they fell into madness due to despair, how they executed divine abilities that would injure both sides. No matter what, Su Ming's expression was as aloof as ever. The sacred would swept through the area, and booming sounds came from 100 places at the same time. They turned into loud bangs that reverberated through all of true sacredine world. They spread out as if there was no end to them. In the midst of the booming sounds, Su Ming's 100 bodies dissipated and gathered together once again to form Su Ming. At that moment, he had just taken his first step. He did it in a relaxed manner, and his expression was as calm as ever, but the bald crane was dumbfounded. It watched everything with a dumbfounded expression, then immediately pounded its chest and bowed its head. What a wastrel! What a wastrel! How many crystals did they have? They're all gone. My crystals, Su Ming smiled faintly. When he lifted his right hand, he flipped it over, and nearly 100 storage bags flew out. The bald crane's spirits were immediately lifted, and it went forward to hug all of them. Great excitement appeared on its face. When Su Ming shook his head, he lifted his foot and took his second step. At the instant his foot landed, he left true sacredine world and appeared in the Emperor of Abyss true world. It was a place that belonged to his will, and at the instant he stepped in, the entire Emperor of Abyss true world shuddered with a bang, as if a disaster had arrived. Su Ming let out a cold harumph, and a gust of wind immediately appeared in the galaxy of the Emperor of Abyss true world. That wind howled and swept in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it grew to an incredibly large size, and Su Ming's face appeared in it. It was incredibly huge, and wherever it went, planets would not be destroyed. Normal cultivators would not be affected. But disbelief and shock appeared on the faces of the powerful warriors from the previous eons. Is this a disaster? That's impossible. There's still 50 years left before the disaster arrives. It's impossible for it to descend ahead of time. But that wind and that face, this is clearly the scene of the disaster descending. While the powerful warriors from the previous eons in the Emperor of Abyss True World were in shock, Su Ming's face formed by the wind that swept through the entire True World charged past them. Wherever it went, not all the powerful warriors from the previous eons died. Instead, 100 people had their bodies and souls destroyed. Those who did not die were not because they were strong enough, but because Su Ming had only killed 100 of them. Even so, to the powerful warriors from the previous eons who survived, the life and death experience filled their hearts with fear, along with a great sense of respect towards Su Ming. The wind blew past. When Su Ming's face disappeared, he stepped into the Emperor of Abyss True World. With a swing of his hand, more than 100 storage bags flew out. By his side, the bald crane immediately cried out in excitement and put away a large amount of them. Its excited look and expression made it seem as if it could faint at any moment. As for the fourth True World, when Su Ming looked at the fourth True World while in the galaxy of the Emperor of Abyss True World, he lifted his right hand and seized space. Immediately, the sacred wood manifested. Once it became several hundreds of thousands of feet big, Su Ming pointed at the fourth True World. With it, the sacred wood shot through space with a bang and instantly appeared in the fourth True World. When it swung its arm, it looked as if a giant was swinging the sacred wood to descend on the fourth True World. It struck space, but at the instant it landed, it shattered and stirred up an endless wave of impact that tumbled outwards with loud rumbles. As it continued spreading out, it looked as if a disaster had been stirred up in the fourth True World. Once the wave of impact killed 100 powerful warriors from the previous eons, it disappeared, but the signs of space shattering remained, as if it was a witness. It caused the powerful warriors from the previous eons who were still alive in arid triad expanse cosmos to sense the danger of death, which they had not experienced for a long time. At that moment, they were no longer people who were obsessed with this feeling. Instead, their fear of death had been awakened once more. This was Su Ming's warning. It was a warning that was neither too big nor too small to Su Ming, but to the powerful warriors from the previous eons, it was a warning that shook the heavens. Once it was done, Su Ming left the Emperor of Abyss True World. When he returned to True Morning Dao World, he fell into a moment of pensive silence before he lifted his right hand and swung his arm. The sacred wood instantly appeared in True Morning Dao World. It continued growing larger until it reached the size it had when it was in the fourth expanse cosmos. Then, it stood erect in True Morning Dao World. The sacred wood exuded a supreme, awe-inspiring, murderous aura. It was as if the shrill souls of 400 cultivators from the previous eons were sealed in it. They screamed continuously in pain, and the intimidating presence it gave off was enough to shake all lives. With this, we can have 50 years of peace. Su Ming cast a glance at the sacred wood, then moved. He did not return in Ninth Summit sect, but went straight to the top of the sacred wood. Once he sat down, he closed his eyes. The bald crane excitedly opened one storage bag after another by his side and continuously plundered the crystals and treasures in them. It was incredibly busy. It was just as Su Ming had said. When the sacred wood stood erect and the shrill souls of the 400 powerful warriors from the previous eons surrounded it, they formed an incredibly intimidating presence to all the powerful warriors from the previous eons in Arid Triad. It caused them to fall silent and no longer dare to take even half a step closer to True Morning Dao World. In fact, some of the slaughter and bloody actions they carried out were reduced by a large margin. The cultivators from the other True Worlds also surged into True Morning Dao World in large numbers, as if the place had truly turned into a paradise in Arid Triad. There were not many people who knew Su Ming's name, but the cultivators who had migrated from True Morning Dao World gradually formed a unified title for him, Supreme Wood. Due to the huge sacred wood and Su Ming's figure sitting on it all year round, this title soon became an honorific title given to him by the cultivators in the land. As time passed, and the number of cultivators in True Morning Dao World increased, 40-something years went by. There were less than 5 years left until the precise time when Good Morning Tao World descended. Next chapter, Arid Triad's Disaster. Requesting monthly votes. Chapter 1484. Not to mention cultivators. Even for mortals, 5 years wasn't a long time. Although it couldn't be described as passing in the blink of an eye, it was often unknown how many 5 years had passed without anyone noticing. The 40-something years after Su Ming established his might could be said to be the quietest period of time in the past 100 years before harmonious Morris Alba faced the countless disasters. There was no longer any slaughter, and neither was there any madness before the disasters. Instead, peace returned. Most of the powerful warriors from the previous eons fell silent. In fact, quite a number of them had chosen to leave. After all, Su Ming's existence had cast a great fear in them, and he had cast a shadow over their hearts. Under this sort of danger, no matter how crazed they were and how much they released their power, it would be difficult for them to last for long. They would always feel slightly uneasy. To them, the 40-something years could be said have been boring. Compared to them, the cultivators who had fled into true Morning Tao world seemed to have found the peace they had in the past. But the prerequisite was that all of Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos had not trembled and the ripples in the galaxy that were almost like an ocean had not appeared. Over the 40-something years, Arid Triad trembled even more violently. When the ripples in the galaxy covered the area, people lifted their heads to look. The sky was no longer blue, but murky. The sun had not appeared for 10 years, and moonlight had disappeared 8 years ago. Nearly half of the planets and continents seemed to have sunk into space while Arid Triad trembled. Only shadows could be seen, but not all of them could be seen. It was as if the galaxy had been split into two. Part of it was the endless reverberating ripples, and the other part was the starry sky that was like a mirror beneath the ripples. The reason why it was called a mirror was that in recent years, if one walked through the starry sky, they would be able to see some planets and continents, as if there were other worlds within a void. Harmonious Morris Alba's other wing had already reached a state where many people could see it. The four wings were so close to each other that they formed a gap that could not be seen with the naked eye. Only when they were magnified several times would they be able to see that the overlap between them was practically perfect. Over the 40-something years, Su Ming had opened his eyes 3 times. The first time was during the first decade. His body in All Spirits Hall had completed its final spirit ascension, and his state of life had completely changed. He had become an ancestral spirit. As his body fused with his body, he opened his eyes and saw the other world in harmonious Morris Alba. There, he saw the hesitation and fear of life. The second time he opened his eyes was during the second decade. He looked as if he had woken up from a deep slumber. He saw Arid Triad, harmonious Morris Alba, Su Xianyi, and Di Tian. Su Ming could somewhat guess what these people's plans were. He might not know everything, but he still had some understanding of them. Most of his attention was focused on the starry sky down below. Just as he was about to close his eyes, he looked up into the void, and a look of enlightenment appeared on his face. The third time he opened his eyes was then. When there were only 5 years left before the disaster, Su Ming opened his eyes and never closed them again. He stared at the world, the galaxy, the void, and all the lives in true Morning Tao world. There was a reluctance to part in Su Ming's eyes, along with the memories of the past, all the beautiful things he had done in Dark Mountain when he was a child, and also a deep sigh towards the world and his home. He knew that everything was about to end. It was unavoidable. Even if his level of cultivation had reached a certain level, he still could not change that fact. In fact, he lacked the power to protect himself. He did not know whether he would be able to survive the disaster and whether he would have the chance to find his senior brothers, Song Lan, and the others. That one stare lasted for 4 years. During it, Su Ming did not close his eyes. It was as if he wanted to remember every single galaxy, every planet, every continent, and even every face. Because Su Ming knew that after this, if he wanted to see these things again, he could only do so in his dreams and his memories. Not everyone would be able to witness the destruction of the world. Not everyone would be able to see the resplendence amidst the destruction. Similarly, not everyone would be able to lament about life before the destruction. Su Ming could be considered relatively lucky because he could sit down and watch the destruction of the world. He could watch all the beautiful things turn into nothingness, and he could watch his home turn into a land of dreams. When Su Ming lifted his head and stared at the void above him, he could vaguely see a vortex in the endless space above him. And it was a river known as the River of Forgetfulness, and on the other side of the river was known as the Other Shore. That was the place he sent all his friends and family to. They brought with them his blessings, and he hoped that they would be able to walk out of the disaster while they were there, avoiding the disaster that even he did not have the confidence to face. As he watched, a smile appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. There was gratification and satisfaction in it. He valued his relationships, and the people he sent to the other shore were the most precious things in his life. Just like that, Su Ming watched for half a year until he sensed the booming sounds and arid triad expanse cosmos surpassing all that had happened in the past. In fact, the entire expanse cosmos was trembling. The ripples became stronger, and Su Ming knew that the disaster had begun. But just when he was about to avert his gaze and organize everything so that he could carry out the most important battle to him, his body suddenly shuddered. It caused his pupils to shrink. He stared at the end of the void above him and stared at the other shore. He could clearly see that the River of Forgetfulness had started flowing backwards. This scene only lasted for an instant before it disappeared. In fact, when Su Ming looked at it again, the River of Forgetfulness was still flowing, but the instant it flowed backwards had caused a great change in Su Ming's heart. He stood up swiftly, and a grave expression that had never appeared on his face before appeared on his face. The instant the River of Forgetfulness had flowed backwards was no small matter. If the River of Forgetfulness could flow backwards, then it meant that the people on the other shore could also flow backwards. If he compared it to the flow of time, then perhaps someone was casting an art to bring all the people Su Ming had sent out back from the flow of time. Fortunately, the reversal only lasted for an instant before it disappeared. With Su Ming's blessings and his own divine abilities, he could carry out the invisible battle of arts and maintain the flow of the River of Forgetfulness so that nothing unexpected could happen to it. In silence, a glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He lifted his right hand and pushed it at the center of his brows. He opened his mouth and coughed up a mouthful of blood. Once he seized it with his left hand, he clenched his fist and did not fling it towards the endless space above him. Instead, he flung it towards the galaxy below him. Immediately, his blood turned into 9 blood-red runic symbols that fused into the galaxy below. Seal the art that reverses time. At the instant Su Ming spoke, his third eye at the center of his brows turned blood-red. The entire galaxy let out a loud bang that shook the sky. The people he had sent out were Su Ming's sore spot, and even if there was only a slight possibility, there was still someone who wanted to touch his sore spot. This was something Su Ming could not accept. When he stood up, a freezing, murderous look that had never appeared on Su Ming's face for many years appeared on his face. The freezing aura spreading out from his body caused the galaxy to show signs of freezing. The first thing he looked at was the fourth expanse cosmos. Only Old Man Extermination had the right to touch Su Ming's sore spot. However, when he looked over, he did not see Old Man Extermination, and neither did he notice any signs of someone reversing time in the fourth expanse cosmos. Su Ming frowned, and his pupils shrank. At the instant a contemplative look appeared on his face, a loud bang that sounded like the one that had appeared during the beginning of the galaxy reverberated in the galaxy. The echoes filled arid triad expanse cosmos, affected divine essence star ocean, spread to dark dawn and Saint D fire, and echoed in the fourth expanse cosmos. The booming echoes from harmonious Morris Alba expanse cosmos also came from space. That sound seemed to be the sound of a disaster ringing in the air. At first glance, it did not sound like a loud bang, but like a sigh of a person who was about to die, letting out his life. The more experienced cultivators from the previous epochs all quieted down. Melancholy could be seen on their faces as they looked up into the starry sky. This was not the first time they had heard such a voice, and they knew that the moment it rang out, it meant that a catastrophe was descending. At the same time, the ripples in the galaxy in arid triad expanse cosmos disappeared without a trace, and the galaxy seemed to have become transparent, allowing the people to see that there was another galaxy under it. Shattering sounds rang out one after another. A destructive presence and the power of the disaster descended on all the expanse cosmoses in harmonious Morris Alba at that moment. Boom! During that instant, a second loud bang rang out. When it echoed in the air, it was like a funeral song that came to harvest souls. At the instant it spread out, most of the cultivators in arid triad had stunned expressions on their faces. No matter what they were doing, smiles appeared on their lips at that instant, and with smiles on their faces, they were reduced to ashes. The disaster. This is the legendary funeral bell for the disaster. Disaster. Ha! An old man laughed madly on a mountain in one of the planets in one of the expanse cosmoses. He pointed at the sky, and his laughter was shrill and forlorn. There was a sect with thousands of cultivators sitting cross-legged and meditating at that moment. There was a smile on their lips as they were reduced to ashes, turning into tears in the eyes of the sect master of the sect in front of them. This sort of scene appeared in all four expanse cosmoses in arid triad. There were also tribes in divine essence star ocean. When shrill roars reverberated in space, it usually meant that a race had disappeared. The powerful warriors from the previous eons who filled many of the regions in arid triad watched this scene, and in their minds, they saw the sorrow of the disaster in their previous eons. It was as if they were no longer murderous creatures without humanity, but had become cultivators once more. It was as if the booming bell had caused them to awaken in the truest sense of their lives. Monthly votes. There's more. Chapter 1485. In the fourth expanse cosmos where the boy opened his eyes while he was at the mountainside. He seemed to have fallen asleep, but at that moment he stared at the sky and mumbled in anguish, "The disaster has descended." At some unknown point of time, the sword cultivator had appeared by his side. He stared at the sky with the boy, but there was a fierce glare in his eyes, along with a powerful fighting spirit. In Dark Dawn's camp, Yenpei stared at the galaxy in a daze. His body trembled, and he could not control it. An indescribable sense of danger that surpassed all the things he had ever felt in his life made him remember the legendary disaster. In anguish, he laughed brokenly, then threw his head back as if he had gone mad. But no matter how mad he was, he could not stop the tears of despair that fell from the corners of his eyes. In Heavenly Fox's expanse cosmos, Zeruah sat quietly on a mountain and stared at the sky. She was dressed in purple, but at that moment, she was not thinking about destruction and the disaster, but a figure that had frequently appeared in her mind over the hundreds of years. In St. Defire's camp, beside the lake in the expanse cosmos where the bald crane had once stared at it for 100 years, was Fei Hua, who now had her face restored and looked like a young girl. She sat there quietly and did not lift her head. Instead, she closed her eyes to hide the melancholy in them. This is a life and death that all lives cannot avoid. As she sighed softly, Fei Hua held a portrait in her hands. Even if she died, she wanted to walk down the path of death with the portrait. Boom! The third bang reverberated in harmonious Morris Alba's expanse cosmos. At the instant it appeared, wind stirred up in arid triad expanse cosmos. It came from divine essence star ocean, and there was no end to it. In an instant, it turned into a huge face. That face was ancient and merciless. At the instant it appeared, the entire galaxy shattered. The first to shatter was divine essence star ocean. As the galaxy continued shattering, it did not collapse. Instead, an indescribable mighty pressure descended from above, wanting to flatten all existences in the expanse cosmos. This scene did not just appear in the barren lands of divine essence. It appeared in the four expanse cosmoses of arid triad, Dark Dawn, and St. Defire. The cultivators who had yet to die sensed the mighty pressure that seemed to want to crush the world, and when they instinctively lifted their heads, they saw something they would not forget even if they died. The calamity did not come from the mirror-like, transparent starry sky below, nor did it come from the other world beneath the transparent starry sky. Instead, it came from above. The mirror surface of the starry sky refracted everything above it. It looked transparent, as if there was an illusion of another world below it, but it was actually a reflection. What was reflected was the emptiness that could be seen when one raised their head. Now, what appeared was another world. It was a completely different expanse cosmos. In fact, they could see its galaxy, planets, continents, and even all its lives. Erytriad was not the only one who could see it. Dark Dawn and Saint Defire could also see the expanse cosmos charging towards them from the galaxy above. However, what they saw was the fourth expanse cosmos, while Erytriad saw Harmonious Morris Alba expanse cosmos. They could not tell whether Erytriad was crashing into Harmonious Morris Alba, or whether Harmonious Morris Alba was attacking Erytriad. Su Ming stood on the sacred wood and lifted his head to look above him. His expression was calm, but his pupils shrank slightly. This disaster does not come from the overlapping of the two wings from below, but from a suppression from above. Due to the suppression, the overlapping of the two wings will happen. Harmonious Morris Alba's expanse cosmos was in the wings, but when the disaster descended and the four wings overlapped with each other, the first thing that appeared was the collision of the sky and earth, the stars and galaxies, and the void and space. This was a suppression. It was as if two palms had been pushed together to destroy everything in the palms. Only then would the overlapping of the two wings be formed. Su Ming had been misled by Harmonious Morris Alba, Erytriad, and even Old Man Extermination. He had thought that the overlapping of the two wings was coming from below, and he was using the overlapping of the two wings to make all existences disappear. A cold sneer appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. This had indeed caused him to be misled, but when he sent the people of Ninth Summit to the other side of the river, he had already understood this. It was especially so when he opened his eyes for the second time 40 years ago and saw the disaster that was about to arrive. At that time, he was even more certain of this. The disaster did not come from the galaxy below, but from the void above. Howling sounds echoed through all of Harmonious Morris Alba at that instant. When the cultivators lifted their heads, they could see another endless galaxy charging towards them. Before long, it would crush down on them. Once it destroyed everything, the four wings of Harmonious Morris Alba would overlap with each other, and the expanse cosmoses where the four wings would completely fuse into one. To cultivators and all living beings, there was nowhere for them to hide. When the sky and earth crashed into each other, they could only run around, but the endless space around them meant that no matter where they ran, they would have to face a suppression. How could they run? How could they hide? Perhaps only the powerful warriors from the previous eons could allow the expanse cosmos above them to descend on them, because once they had fused with their other selves, they no longer cared about this sort of suppression. As the sky and earth closed in on each other, when the fourth bell chime rang out in Harmonious Morris Alba's expanse cosmos, the wind between the two expanse cosmoses started howling in a manner that had never been seen before in that aeon. The face that appeared in the wind swept through everything with an aloof gaze. Wherever it went, all lives would wither and all lives would be destroyed. The shrill roars and the unwillingness to admit defeat before they died became the only melody in the world at that moment. Erytriad had already started waking up. As the wind grew stronger and the barren lands of divine essence turned into ruins, be it Black Ink Planet or the Fifth Ocean, all the lives and races in them turned into nothingness, and the wind that rose from the barren lands of divine essence turned into Erytriad's face. It became increasingly corporeal, and when the wind blew towards the four great true worlds from the barren lands of divine essence, the face became incredibly clear. However, its eyes were still closed, and it did not open them. When the wind swept past the fourth true world and true sacredine world, Arid Triad's wind seemed to be suppressing the entire galaxy. There was an endless space beneath it, and in the middle was Arid Triad's wind. It swirled in the air as if it was searching for the signs of certain life. It gathered all their life force, causing the face to disappear and form the figure of a young man. The young man was dressed in a long green robe. He had no hair, and his eyes were closed. He walked in the wind, and when he reached true morning Tao world, while standing on the sacred wood, Su Ming had already turned his head around to look at the young man with his eyes closed in the wind that had stepped into true morning Tao world. Arid Triad. When Su Ming said those words softly, he took a step forward. He knew that Arid Triad had come to search for him, and the battle between him and Arid Triad was an unavoidable fight to the death for possession. Either he would live, and Arid Triad would have no more thoughts, or he would die, and Arid Triad might no longer be Arid Triad. When Su Ming's foot landed, his body disappeared from the sacred wood. When he reappeared, he was right in front of Arid Triad's wind. Behind him was true morning Tao world, and above him was harmonious Morris Alba, expanse cosmos charging towards him. Beneath his feet was no longer an endless expanse of space, but an endless space. It was also at that instant that Arid Triad opened his eyes for the first time in his aeon. He woke up. When Arid Triad opened his eyes, Su Ming slowly closed them as well. At the instant he did so, his world became dark. At the instant he did so, wind appeared behind him. It was also a dark wind, and it was the wind formed by the wills of the two great true worlds in Arid Triad. The wind came from the immortal sex and Sky Hill expanse cosmos, which was charging towards him from harmonious Morris Alba expanse cosmos above him. The wind formed by the fusion of the wills of the four great true worlds swept up Su Ming, who had his eyes closed. At the instant Arid Triad opened his eyes, the two of them swiftly closed in on him. A loud bang sounded like the fifth bell chime as the world was destroyed. At the instant it spread out, Arid Triad's wind covered Su Ming, and Su Ming's wind submerged Arid Triad. The two of them had completely fused together and were surrounded by wind. Even if it was Old Man Extermination, Di Tian, or Su Xianyi, no one could see what was happening in there clearly. Only harmonious Morris Alba. That was the most powerful butterfly in the world. At that moment, after waiting for an unknown number of epochs, it appeared for the first time in the world. It was a butterfly that was almost transparent. It was multicolored, and as soon as it appeared, it seemed to steal away all the splendor in the world. It descended from harmonious Morris Alba, expanse cosmos above, and appeared as if it was sinking. At the instant it appeared, it turned into a five-colored gust of wind that charged towards the spot where Arid Triad and Su Ming had fused together, and swiftly fused into it. At the same time, Di Tian sat on the mountain in the collapsing and trembling Death vortex. His body trembled, and his expression changed continuously. After some time, he coughed up a mouthful of blood, formed a seal with his hands, and pushed them against his body. Su Ming, I will use you as my epiphany and fuse with your life matrix. It doesn't matter whether you hate me or are calm, no matter what. I will help you this time, because only if you succeed will I be able to succeed. You cannot fail. Di Tian threw his head back and roared. When he formed a seal with his hands, his cultivation base and his soul erupted from his body after fusing with the other 7 souls. As long as my life matrix does not shatter, then we will not die. A circular picture appeared above Di Tian's head. It was formed by black and red threads intersecting with each other. It was endlessly dazzling and shone with a strange light. Most of that light was black, and if anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see Su Ming's entire life in the picture, and they would also be able to see Di Tian's entire life. They intersected with each other, and it was difficult to separate them. Today, I sent 3 pictures in my WeChat account. Reply: Su Hui, Lu Mei, and Morning Death. You can see 3 different pictures. Also last night, I admit that I was a little prankish. I took a very sexy picture of my deflated eggplant. It likes one of its dolls a lot, and it always thinks that it's its wife. Last night, it and its wife. Ahem, I took a picture. Reply, 123, and you'll see it. I'll only send it for one day. I'll delete it tomorrow. Chapter 1486. Blood capillaries filled D. Tion's eyes, and he looked as if he was about to cry tears of blood. His robes fluttered without wind, and even the hair under his crown floated up. He had an unprecedentedly solemn look on his face. He used practically all his strength to ensure that the life matrix floating above him did not shatter. The life matrix shone with a dazzling light. The darkness contained a darkness that the night sky could not taint, causing the world to instantly turn black, as if it had turned into a black ocean that had submerged the entire world. D. Tion had been Su Ming's destined enemy during the first half of his life, but at that moment, he was persistently protecting Su Ming's life matrix. This might sound ironic, but D. Tion's focused expression and hard work made it seem like it was not funny. Instead, it was a little sad. He was powerless to get through the destruction, and in the face of his family and friends willingly dying to help him, he could not fail. He did not want to fail, and he could not accept failure. There was no absolute right or wrong in the world. It did not matter whether it was Su Ming, D. Tion, Su Xian Yi, or even Old Man Extermination. They were all the same. Perhaps some of their actions had harmed other people's interests and caused harm to other people. But from their perspective, they believed that they were right, and they had their own beliefs. Take Arid Triad, for example. No one could say that he was cruel and wrong, except for Harmonious Morris Alba. But Arid Triad wanted to survive. He wanted to continue existing. He wanted to become stronger. He could not accept becoming a life born in the expanse cosmos in the wings. He wanted to become the master of the vast expanse. This was his Tao, and he was not wrong. Harmonious Morris Alba stood aloof from the world, but in the end, it ended up in such a state. It believed that everything in the world was wrong, and only it was right, but while it was a creator to all lives, it was also a destroyer. It wanted to become a complete version of itself, and no longer die. Instead, it wanted to return home, but to the others, the price for it to return home was the destruction of itself and all the people around it. As for D. Tion, wasn't he the same? Once a person's level of cultivation reached a certain level and their intelligence reached its peak, they would be able to see through themselves, and they would also be able to see through others. They would understand everything. In truth, all serendipities and all their steps revolved around Tao. Different Taos, different Taos. Instead of saying that Harmonious Morris Alba's disaster had descended and destruction had appeared, it would be more accurate to say that the prodigies in Harmonious Morris Alba were verifying each other's Taos. Just who would be the one who would truly succeed, and whose Tao would be the great Tao. Su Ming had understood this a long time ago. That was why, even though he could find D. Tion, he did not do so, because he had already seen through D. Tion, just like how D. Tion had seen through Su Ming. Su Ming knew that all the things D. Tion did in the first half of his life were definitely not done on a whim. There was some sort of plan behind it. Su Ming could not guess what that plan was, but he could more or less guess what was based on the countless clues he had gathered. It was as like as possible. If one wanted to copy it, they had to observe it. Even ordinary observation was not enough. Only after a strong immersion could they achieve a perfect copy. Only then would they be able to overlap with the real scene and become indistinguishable from each other. Because if he failed, then it would be equivalent to D. Tion's copy being completely useless. As for Su Xian, he might be a cunning person. He might be incredibly sinister, and his schemes were as deep as the sea. But once Su Ming ended things with him in the past, he had already understood that no matter how sinister this person was, in the end, he would not be plotting against Su Ming. To Su Xian, he was just a person to be used in the early stages and not forever. His rise was an accident to Su Xian, an accident that would not change his plans. Su Xianyi's target was Old Man Extermination. That was why when Su Ming left the fourth expanse cosmos in the past, he had mumbled that when he ran into Old Man Extermination again, would he still be Old Man Extermination? It was precisely because of this epiphany that Su Ming did not step into the fourth true world when he killed the powerful warriors of the previous eons, because he knew that Su Xian Yi was there. Su Xian Yi's enemy was Old Man Extermination. If that was the case, Su Ming would not interfere with him. The situation might seem chaotic and complicated, but in truth, Su Ming had long since smoothed it out in his mind. His enemies were Arid Triad, Old Man Extermination, and Harmonious Morris Alba, which Su Ming had just discovered. It was just like what Arid Triad had said in the past. He was a cultivator, and Su Ming was also a cultivator, but Harmonious Morris Alba was just a life form. When he questioned why Su Ming did not help him, he also questioned why Su Ming would help Harmonious Morris Alba. If Su Ming had indeed been helping Harmonious Morris Alba at that time, then after experiencing everything and seeing the black-robed young man as well as Old Man Extermination, he was no longer helping either side. He was a part of camp. This was the situation during the disaster. It might have seemed complicated and chaotic, but in truth, it was a very clear picture. Almost at the moment Su Ming and Arid Triad's wind fused together, Harmonious Morris Alba arrived, and Tion ensured that his life matrix would not shatter. Old Man Extermination opened his eyes from the ancient ship hidden beside the gap in the fourth expanse cosmos. The moment he opened his eyes, an aura of awakening suddenly circled around his body. The time is finally up. When Old Man Extermination mumbled, a brilliant light shone in his eyes. When he lifted his right hand, his gaze fell on it, as if he was staring at the palm lines on his palm. During that instant, Su Xian Yi shuddered in the floating palace in the fourth true world in Arid Triad Expanse Cosmos. He lifted his head, and a profound smile appeared at the corners of his lips. His eyes shone with the greatest anticipation in his life, as if he had been waiting for countless years. My son, Lei Chun, my hands have been stained with blood, and I have killed countless people. Perhaps there are many people I have let down, but everything I have done is for the Abyss Builders to rise to power. For you. You will be the Abyss Builders' hope. You will be the future tribe leader of the Abyss Builders who will rise to power once more in the vast expanse. Su Xian Yi stood up slowly. When he lowered his head, a rattle drum appeared on his palm. Su Ming had once possessed that drum, but at that time, he did not know that Lei Chun also had one. However, the one Su Ming had was created by his elder, and the one Lei Chun had belonged to Su Xian Yi. Lei Chun, my son, I will create an unprecedented chance for you. A chance that will allow you to possess Old Man Extermination. This is the greatest plan I, Su Xian Yi, have been planning for my entire life. Su Xian Yi swung his arm, and madness appeared on his face. He had been waiting for this day for a long, long time. He had personally seen his father, the Abyss Builder's progenitor, foolishly loyal to Old Man Extermination. He had also personally witnessed the destruction of the fifth true world, but in truth, the one who had truly attacked was his father. He had seen everything. He had also seen Old Man Extermination controlling the Abyss Builder's progenitor after his father. In fact, he had even learned many secrets that the other members of his race did not know, such as that the Abyss Builders were in truth a race led by Old Man Extermination. The only value in the race's existence was for Old Man Extermination to study them, as if he wanted to find something from them. Su Xian Yi had watched his race die, watched his family turn into ashes as they screamed shrilly, and watched his homeland, the fifth true world that only existed in his memories, turn into ruins. He hated the Abyss Builder's progenitor. He hated his own bloodline, and he hated all the lives in the universe. From that moment onwards, his personality completely changed. A crazy but stubborn thought appeared in the depths of his heart. With the Abyss Builder's inborn ability, possess Old Man Extermination. If I can't do it, then I will make my son do it. Su Xian Yi threw his head back and laughed. This was his plan. Only by doing so could he be considered to have taken revenge for his people, for the fifth true world, and for the Abyss Builders. For revenge, he could sacrifice his wife. For revenge, He could sacrifice his best friend's son. For revenge, he could even lose his humanity. All of this was about to come to an end. Su Xianyi's gaze landed on Lei Chun, who was meditating in front of him. The gratification and kindness of a father gradually appeared in his eyes. After a long while, when a vortex gradually appeared behind Su Xian, he did not hesitate in the slightest. He turned around and stepped into it. At the instant he stepped into the vortex, Old Man Extermination's ancient voice echoed in his heart. Son of Abyss Builders, based on the promise I made with your race, turn into my palm and stir up the funeral knell that throws time into chaos. Stir up the resentment that seals your wills. Only the resentment of those born in the true world can bury the peak of all lives in this true world. Only the resentment of those who come from the same source as you can seal the strongest in this true world. As Old Man Extermination's words echoed in space, Su Xianyi's body distorted in the vortex. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a palm. It was white and looked as if it was spotless. With a swing, it shot out of the vortex, but it was no longer in the fourth true world. Instead, it was in Dark Dawn and Saint Defire's camp. You're my palm. Turn into the palm lines of my will. A glint appeared in Old Man Extermination's eyes as he stood on the ancient ship in the fourth expanse cosmos. The palm print Su Ming had left behind on the wooden ship in front of him instantly disappeared, but as it did so, the exact same palm lines gradually appeared on the palm formed by Su Xianyi. The sacrifice will begin. For the first time in many years, Old Man Extermination stood up. His long hair moved without wind, and when he swung his arm, he let out a low voice. When his voice echoed in space, the huge feng shui compass appeared in the vast expanse beyond harmonious Morris Alba's expanse. The black-robed young man meditating on the feng shui compass held the seventh pearl in his hand. His eyes were aloof as he stared at the harmonious Morris Alba, filled with the aura of death not too far away from him. He came. First update. Chapter 1487. When the other expanse cosmos descended from the space above arid triad expanse cosmos, the suppression appeared, and all lives were destroyed. Everything sank into chaos, as if it was the apocalypse. Death was everywhere. Only the wind that existed between the upper and lower expanse cosmoses roared continuously in space. In the midst of it, Su Ming and Arid Triad engaged in a battle to the death in a spot no one could see. They did not use any divine abilities. Instead, their wills crashed against each other. As booming sounds echoed in space, their figures could no longer be seen in the wind. It was as if they had fused together and become one. Su Ming, why must you refuse to realize your errors? We are both cultivators, and harmonious Morris Alba is just a life. Why must you do this? I'm not doing this for harmonious Morris Alba, but for myself. If I want to live, this is the only way. Live? This isn't difficult. Once we become harmonious Morris Alba, there's no way we can't live. It doesn't matter whether it's your family or friends, they can continue living. I once told you about the black-robed young man who represents destruction while sitting on the feng shui compass. Do you still not believe me? The person you mentioned is in the memories I possessed. His name is Xian Zong, but he is already dead. I didn't tell you about this in the past, but now I can tell you clearly that this person is already dead. He has been dead for an unknown period of time. In fact, when the 9 harmonious Morris Alba were born, he was already dead. How could he possibly appear here? No matter what you saw, those are things that happened in the past. It's impossible for him to appear here, and the aura of death in harmonious Morris Alba isn't because of him either. It's because if harmonious Morris Alba can't devour me and become complete, it will truly die. And its death means that both of us will rise to power. Then what about Old Man Extermination? I've been paying attention to Old Man Extermination for a long time. He did indeed come from the other harmonious Morris Alba. In fact, I suspect that he was once in that harmonious Morris Alba's expanse cosmos, just like me. We both possessed Harmonious Morris Alba's will, but his arrival doesn't mean that Harmonious Morris Alba has died. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. You didn't possess Harmonious Morris Alba. You possess me. That's why you don't know that once you possess me for the first time, unless both of us are complete, if one of us dies, the other will die as well. That was why if Old Man Extermination had completed his possession, it would be easy to explain why he appeared in this place. There was definitely another expanse cosmos in his body, and if he did not complete his possession, then it would mean that Harmonious Morris Alba still existed. He was not dead, and there was no black-robed Xianzong. Su Ming, are you still not going to wake up? That so-called black-robed Xianzong was intentionally created by Old Man Extermination. In fact, it was intentionally revealed by Harmonious Morris Alba in this expanse cosmos. It did it so that it would be impossible for us to work together, and it would make you stubborn. You still don't believe me. There was a sigh in Su Ming's voice. When it echoed in the air, he and Arid Triad began devouring and possessing each other again. Su Ming was possessing Arid Triad, and Arid Triad was devouring Su Ming. Their wills erupted in the most brilliant manner in their lives in the wind. The devouring and possession immediately caused the wind to turn black and white. The white was Arid Triad, and the black was Su Ming. When the two of them came into contact with each other, the black and white parts of the wind seemed to be devouring each other. Either the light would devour the darkness, or the darkness would possess the light. This was a battle of wills that had to decide the victor. When it seemed that it would be difficult for either of them to decide the outcome within a short period of time, the butterfly formed by Harmonious Morris Alba fused into the wind. Once it descended, 5 colors immediately appeared in the wind. The wind in the land was originally black and white, but at that moment, it turned into a 7-colored light. Arid Triad was not surprised by Harmonious Morris Alba's appearance. He knew a long time ago that this was a plan by Su Ming and Harmonious Morris Alba working together. At that moment, when the wind turned into 7 colors, Arid Triad's wind swept through the entire world and harvested lives. Once he absorbed their life force, he immediately launched a counterattack against Su Ming and Harmonious Morris Alba. When Harmonious Morris Alba's butterfly spun around with the 5 colors, hatred that was carved into its bones appeared in its eyes. It hated Arid Triad, and in fact, it hated all the lives in its world. At that moment, it glared at Arid Triad, and its hatred, which had been suppressed for countless years, erupted completely. Harmonious Morris Alba, I possessed you once in the past, then today. Even if you bewitched Su Ming, I can possess you a second time. Since you dared to come here, then let us see just who will be able to last until the end, without his will breaking. There was an air of supremacy in Arid Triad's voice when it reverberated in space. The white wind he formed instantly charged forward to crash against the 5-colored wind formed by Harmonious Morris Alba. At the same time, the black wind formed by Su Ming also crashed into Arid Triad and Harmonious Morris Alba, as if it had turned into a vortex that was pulling at them. Boom! This was the first time the 3 great wills of the expanse cosmos clashed against each other at full force. This sort of collision would shatter each other's wills, descend into madness, and possess each other's shattered fragments. Su Ming shuddered. The wind he formed looked as if it was about to crumble. It was the same for Arid Triad, but Harmonious Morris Alba's condition was even worse. It looked as if it was about to scatter, and the density of the aura of death on its body had swiftly increased by several-fold. At the same time, Ditian coughed up a huge mouthful of blood while he was in Death Vortex. The life matrix floating above him let out cracking sounds and started shattering. Ditian's eyes were bloodshot. With a low growl, he formed a seal with his hands and spared no expense to use his life to repair the life matrix. Arid Triad, I want you dead. For the first time, Harmonious Morris Alba's voice traveled through the wind between them. The hatred in its voice seemed to have not dissipated even after countless years. It was so thick that it could not be dispelled in the slightest. At that moment, When it spoke, the entire world trembled with a bang. Once that voice appeared, the five-colored wind that Harmonious Morris Alba had turned into a vortex. It spread outwards and swept outwards to crash into Arid Triad again. Su Ming, use the Harmonious Morris Alba art I taught you. Harmonious Morris Alba spoke at the instant it crashed into Arid Triad. Its voice echoed in Su Ming's ears, but he remained calm, as if he did not hear it. An incantation had indeed appeared in his mind. It was complicated and difficult to understand. It did not seem to be dangerous and was just a method to circulate his will, but Su Ming already possessed a Tao divinity. At the instant the incantation appeared in his mind, his Tao divinity sent him a strong sense of danger. Boom! The second collision caused Arid Triad to tumble backwards. The white wind he formed was about to scatter, and it was the same for Su Ming. As for Harmonious Morris Alba, 3 colors of its 5-colored light instantly disappeared, and a shrill cry echoed in space. Su Ming, I can help you possess Arid Triad, but it doesn't mean that I can change my will and synchronize with yours so that I can become a part of you, Su Ming said slowly. Almost at the instant Su Ming said those words, the butterfly formed by Harmonious Morris Alba shuddered and dissipated. 5 colors appeared in the wind it formed again, and as it swept outwards, it charged towards Arid Triad. It spread out and formed a vortex that enveloped Su Ming. Harmonious Morris Alba. A hoarse and ancient voice echoed in space. The vortex formed by Harmonious Morris Alba's wind turned into a huge 5-colored butterfly. As it spun in space, Arid Triad closed his eyes. In an instant, his body disappeared, and as the wind behind him howled, he turned into a white butterfly. In silence, the third eye at the center of Su Ming's brow opened. His Tao divinity also opened its eyes. In the span of a breath, his body disappeared and turned into the third butterfly in the destructive disaster. It was a huge black butterfly. The 3 butterflies crashed into each other again. This was Harmonious Morris Alba's full-powered strike, Arid Triad's devouring again, and Su Ming's possession. At the instant the 3 butterflies crashed into each other, the huge feng shui compass in which the black-robed young man meditated in the vast universe beyond Harmonious Morris Alba appeared above it. The scene Su Ming had seen in the past was reenacted. The black-robed young man lifted his left hand and pushed gently against the feng shui compass. With it, all the runic symbols on the feng shui compass shone. Waves of power that could destroy everything erupted from the feng shui compass and turned into a powerful suction force that instantly enveloped the butterfly under the feng shui compass. From the distance, the feng shui compass was thousands of times bigger than the butterfly, and only when it was compared to the butterfly could the true size of the feng shui compass be seen. Usually, since there was no reference in the vast universe, the size of the butterfly could not be seen, but right then, the size of the feng shui compass indirectly proved just how big the black-robed young man was. It was as if the butterfly before him was just like a normal butterfly before a mortal in a mortal world. When the feng shui compass activated its suction force, and the black-robed young man's eyes were as aloof as ever, Harmonious Morris Alba, which was fighting against Su Ming and Arid Triad to devour each other, shuddered. The 5-colored butterfly that was it had never seen before showed fear and disbelief on its face. This presence is... Despair appeared in the butterfly that was Harmonious Morris Alba as it shuddered. It wanted to give up on devouring each other and return to its body so that it could cast a glance at the source of the presence in the vast universe outside, but there was no longer any need for it. At the instant it noticed the presence, it understood everything. He didn't die? Did he still have monthly votes? Chapter 1488. He didn't die, but all Harmonious Morris Alba in the vast universe will be destroyed. This is a predestined fate. The butterfly that was Harmonious Morris Alba shuddered, and madness appeared on its face. It understood why it could no longer sense the other harmonious Morris Alba's presences. It thought that it had lost this ability after being possessed. It had even dreamed of snatching its other half back so that it would be complete. Then, it would spread its wings and search for them in the vast universe. It would search for its family and home. Yet now, it completely understood that it was not that it had lost its ability to sense, but that most of the other harmonious Morris Albas had been wiped off due to their predestined fate. And it just, how long have I been resting here? In anguish, harmonious Morris Alba sensed itself rapidly weakening. The speed at which it weakened caused it to feel as if it had lost nearly 3/10 of its will. It knew that it would first weaken, and when its will disappeared, Arid Triad would die, but it laughed madly. There was a forlorn, shrill tone to its ancient laughter, along with a hatred that surpassed all other emotions. It did not hate the source of the presence, but Arid Triad, who had possessed it. Even if I am destined to be wiped off, I will watch you die with my own eyes. Arid Triad immediately noticed harmonious Morris Alba's rapid weakening, and Su Ming noticed it as well. Compared to Arid Triad pouncing on harmonious Morris Alba without hesitation, Su Ming's heart trembled. He had a vague idea of what was going on. At that moment, Su Ming, you have to help even if you don't want to, you still have to help. Because only when Arid Triad dies will you have enough time to send your family back to the other world. If Arid Triad doesn't die, then his existence will be the same as closing all the entrances leading to the void. Unless you replace him, it will be impossible for you to send your people from the Ninth Summit out again. You don't dare take the risk. And I can also tell you that the world you opened with your will exists. There was a ferocious tone to harmonious Morris Alba's shrill voice. At the instant its words echoed in space, the expanse cosmos above Arid Triad expanse cosmos sank, and a huge vortex appeared in the void. The vortex flowed in reverse, and Su Ming could see the river of forgetfulness in it. The river was also flowing in reverse. Gradually, he could see some figures on the other side of the river, and there were people Su Ming was familiar with. Their bodies seemed to be dragged by an indescribable power, as if they were about to be dragged out from the passage of time. Su Ming had once seen the river of forgetfulness flowing in reverse, and it was not a figment of his imagination. It was real, and it was a taboo for him. When he did not find any traces of old man extermination interfering with his search, he could not think of who could have done so. At that moment, Su Ming understood that the one who had interfered with all of this was harmonious Morris Alba. This was its method to keep Su Ming in check. If Su Ming did not cooperate with it, then it could keep him in check. Even if Su Ming went back on his word in the beginning and worked together with Arid Triad, since harmonious Morris Alba dared to show up, it was clear that it had absolute confidence in its ability to do so. Su Ming was silent. He stared at the familiar faces in the vortex outside, and killing intent that had never appeared before slowly appeared in his eyes. This was his taboo, and harmonious Morris Alba had touched his taboo. You're wrong. When Su Ming spoke, the butterfly disappeared and turned back into Su Ming. He charged towards harmonious Morris Alba. By his side, Arid Triad laughed loudly. The white butterfly turned into a white whirlwind, and as it charged forward, it looked like it was about to drown harmonious Morris Alba. It's too late. Their return is a fate you won't be able to stop. Only by possessing Arid Triad can you send them back. As harmonious Morris Alba laughed shrilly, the speed at which the river of forgetfulness flowed in reverse in the vortex instantly increased by 100 times. All the people on the riverbank shuddered, and they were all dragged to the river of forgetfulness. They were about to reach the other side of the river. At that moment, 9 blood-red runic symbols appeared on the riverbank. They shone and turned into a layer of blood fog. They turned into a barrier that blocked the passage of time, causing the vortex to look like it was about to close up. This scene stunned harmonious Morris Alba. At that moment, Su Ming charged towards it with killing intent that had touched harmonious Morris Alba's bottom line. He knew very well that his act of sealing the river of forgetfulness could only last for a short period of time. He had to rush out of the place at the fastest speed possible and send all the people from Ninth Summit who had been dragged into the river of forgetfulness back into that world. And if he wanted to rush out, he had to first suppress harmonious Morris Alba and have Arid Triad possess it. Only by doing so would Arid Triad have no time to destroy it. When these thoughts appeared in Su Ming's mind, he had already closed in on harmonious Morris Alba. I still have time. Red appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He was not as calm as he appeared to be. His heart was in pain, and his mind was trembling. The scene in the secrets of the universe seemed to have become a shadow in his heart, a brand that could not be wiped off. Over there were the people he cared about the most in his life. Over there was his greatest reluctance to part with them. He did not want the scene in the secrets of the universe to become real. He did not want to lose everything and become a lonely person. Even if he was alone at that moment, he still had dreams in his heart, expectations, and a persistent pursuit. That pursuit was that one day he would be able to search for Ninth Summit. He would be able to find them, and he would be able to continue living in that world. More red appeared in Su Ming's eyes. His madness brought with it his speed. At the instant he rushed towards harmonious Morris Alba. The strongest will in his life erupted from his body. It was the strongest strike. He had gathered together the four great true worlds, his soul, and his life. He had executed this attack in front of the black-robed young man when he was in the passage of time, and he had also executed it against Arid Triad in the flesh tunnel. At that moment, Su Ming's will of Tao divinity was added to it. The strongest strike that contained a hint of boundless Tao realm's presence erupted at that instant, as if his life was blooming. With his body as a sword and his will as a blade, he instantly closed in on harmonious Morris Alba. As harmonious Morris Alba rapidly weakened, a loud bang that shook the sky and earth reverberated through all of harmonious Morris Alba's expanse cosmos. It even spread out and echoed in the vast expanse, causing the black-robed young man on the feng shui compass to lower his head slightly and cast it a glance. Amid the booming sounds, harmonious Morris Alba's body was pierced by Su Ming. Arid Triad followed closely behind him. With the desire he had accumulated for countless years, a determined madness, and shock towards Su Ming's strongest strike. Once harmonious Morris Alba's body withstood Su Ming's strike, he turned into an endless white gust of wind that instantly enveloped harmonious Morris Alba. Harmonious Morris Alba let out a shrill cry. The devouring that Arid Triad had longed for countless eons was completely carried out at that instant. Harmonious Morris Alba had miscalculated Su Ming's decision. It thought that it could use this method to keep Su Ming in check, but it did not expect that Su Ming would never submit, especially when his reverse scale was touched. He would either erupt in silence, or he would choose to die in silence. There was no third choice. There was no compromise. The price it paid for its miscalculation was speeding up its own death. It was the one who helped Arid Triad achieve his goal. It was the one who could no longer see Arid Triad's destruction. The only thing it could see was Arid Triad devouring it in the end and completing the expanse cosmos. At that moment, Su Ming did not bother about Arid Triad devouring harmonious Morris Alba. He rushed out and instantly appeared in front of the vortex. At that moment, the blood-red seal Su Ming had placed in the vortex was starting to weaken, as if it could no longer stop harmonious Morris Alba's will from pulling at it and reversing the flow of time. In fact, Su Ming could see the dazed faces of all the people he had sent away from Ninth Summit behind the thin blood fog. Su Ming's heart ached even more. He swiftly lifted his right hand, intending to execute his divine ability again. At the instant Arid Triad devoured harmonious Morris Alba, he would tear through space again so that the people of Ninth Summit could return to the other side of the river. He would make the scene of the secrets of the universe become something that should never have happened. However, there were times when the change of fate could be completed, but there were also times when the change of fate was right in front of you. But even if you used all your strength, you could not touch it. Time flowed like water, and life was like a dream. If you asked yourself how long life was, why did it always go from winter to summer? And why did it have to go from the night drum to the morning bell? Who sighed during the past 4 seasons? How many joys and sorrows were there in the ringing of the bell? Who was it that made flowers bloom and wilt with a flick of their fingers? The moon became full and waned? When you lowered your head to look at the candlelight, did you see the lights of tens of thousands of houses? Or did you see the flourishing and flourishing life gradually fade into the distance? Only some of the wrinkles of memories were left. They were crushed by the light dust of time. Perhaps this was Tao. It was also a shrill, forlorn laughter when the world was destroyed. The messy long hair and the strange purple hue seemed to have turned into tears in the heart. They were the color of blood, but if darkness fused with it, it would turn into a color that people knew but did not know its meaning. It was purple. Purple was the fusion of blood and darkness. It was the shrill cries of blood and the crazed gathering of darkness to turn into a death that no one could ever touch. It dyed the heart purple, and once it dyed the blood in darkness, it turned into a terrifying purple that no one could understand. Under the long purple hair and purple eyes, it turned into a lone boat that walked alone in the river of forgetfulness. Under the moonlight, when people looked at it, they would find that the lonely figure sitting on the boat had long since disappeared. Only the reflection in the river still had a vague image. He still remembered the ferryman who wore a bamboo hat and a straw raincoat. Su Ming's Tao was originally moving from midwinter to spring. He had already walked to autumn, and he was originally moving from death to life. He had already walked to the point where he could open his eyes, but at that instant, his Tao changed. Since spring is no longer around, why should I chase after waking up? I am willing to search for the shattered figure who will stay by my side in the darkness. Since the world I see when I open my eyes is so sad, I would rather close my eyes forever. What will bloom before my eyes will be endless darkness. I will bring this darkness to the world and give it to all lives. This might be my Tao. My fellow Taoists, do you still have your monthly votes? Chapter 1489. Once the withered wood of time was crushed and added to the clear water of time, it would turn into a clear piece of paper. No matter what color it was in the past, once ink was splashed on it, it would turn into the color of a world separated from the world, but it would never return to its original state. Su Xianyi's Tao was for his son, Lei Chun, to possess old man extermination, but before that he needed a chance. He needed help, and that help was the palm he had turned into at that moment. Under the space above dark dawn and Saint D fire that covered the universe were the hate-filled gazes and the madness before the destruction of the world. With indescribable resentment, they turned into a curse that came from all manner of lives. This was a setup old man extermination had set up a long time ago and gathered together the resentment. Regardless of whether it was Dark Dawn or Saint D fire, under Old Man Extermination's arrangements, they had all turned into Su Ming's appearance. When they moved about, they had slaughtered, causing all 360 expanse cosmoses in Dark Dawn and Saint D fire to be filled with indescribable resentment towards him. They had seen their family and friends brutally killed by Su Ming. They had also seen their people screaming shrilly in pain behind him. Even those who did not die had endured the torture of their bodies and souls, which allowed their resentment to exist for a long period of time. It could last for a long period of time, and before the world was destroyed, they could unleash an unprecedented madness in the midst of their unwillingness to die. The resentment was originally an illusory thing, but it could be seen as a will. The might of a single person's will was not great, but if 10 million, 100 million, 10 billion, or even more people from all 360 expanse cosmoses from Dark Dawn and Saint D fire cursed one person at the same time during the most dazzling moment of their lives, then at the same time, it would become real. This was a truth that could be created out of nothing. In fact, this power could be seen as Tao in certain aspects. If it was placed in the eyes of a country and its people desired for it to be destroyed, then that country would definitely be destroyed. This was only in the mortal world. In a cultivation world, the same principle existed. If someone used it, it could become a sharp weapon. At the most crucial moment, it could explode with the most powerful attack. The resentment from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire gathered together at that moment and was immediately absorbed by the huge palm formed by Su Xian, causing it to instantly turn even darker, as if it contained the power of the universe. During that instant, the palm swayed and overlapping shadows appeared on it. Shockingly, it had split into two. When the palm split into two, Old Man Extermination's pupils shrank while he sat cross-legged on the ancient ship in the fourth expanse cosmos. One of the palms that had split into two had Old Man Extermination's will tear through space and charge towards Arid Triad. As for the other, it also tore through space, but it headed to the fourth expanse cosmos, where Old Man Extermination was. Su Xian. A glint appeared in Old Man Extermination's eyes. The moment he spoke, the huge palm formed by Su Xian shot through space and appeared in front of Old Man Extermination's ancient ship. Su Xian Yi's face manifested on the palm. There was determination and madness on it, along with a hint of hatred that had been buried in his heart for an unknown number of years. Abyss Builder, Possession. Su Xian threw his head back and roared. The palm formed by him instantly touched the ancient ship with endless resentment and charged towards Old Man Extermination. You overestimate yourself. Old Man Extermination let out a cold harumph. I'm the one who created your people. How dare you possess me? Old Man Extermination swung his arm, and a gust of black wind charged forward. It instantly turned into a huge skull in front of him, and there was a small person sitting cross-legged on it. That small person looked exactly the same as Extermination. It was his Tao divinity. At that moment, the small person's expression remained the same. The skull under him opened its mouth and charged towards Su Xian. But when the skull closed in on Su Xian, Old Man Extermination frowned. He seized the air with his right hand, and the skull instantly disappeared. I can't waste the resentment gathered on you. If my plan against Su Ming is affected because of you, even if you die 10,000 times, you won't be able to make up for it. Since you like possessing others, then I will reward you with the glory of being possessed by me. A ferocious smile appeared at the corners of Old Man Extermination's lips. As he spoke, he swung his arm, and his Tao divinity appeared in front of him. It opened its mouth wide and revealed a ferocious expression before turning into a long arc that charged towards the palm, formed by Su Xian. With a loud bang, Old Man Extermination's Tao divinity and the palm formed by the resentment of Su Xian crashed into each other. Immediately, they began possessing each other, but Su Xian was clearly not as good as Old Man Extermination. In just the span of a few breaths, half of the palm formed by him was occupied by Extermination. However, there was not a hint of panic on Su Xian's face that appeared on the palm. Instead, a hint of derision appeared at the corners of his lips. There was arrogance in that derision, along with confidence that he would never miss anything. There was also an expression that said that he no longer had any attachment to life and was instead looking forward to a better future. Extermination, you lost. Su Xian laughed loudly as he was possessed. Old Man Extermination frowned. At the instant he did so, his expression changed. At that moment, a third person's presence appeared on Su Xian's body. The third person's presence belonged to Lei Chun. At that moment, Lei Chun was sitting cross-legged in the palace in the fourth true world. His entire body was filled with countless fine black needles. He shuddered, and tears fell from his eyes. His body swiftly withered away at that instant. His will, his soul, his life, and everything else appeared on Su Xian's body in the form of his blood. This was Su Xian's plan. He knew that he could not fight against Old Man Extermination. Regardless of whether it was his level of cultivation or his ability to possess someone, he was far inferior to him. He knew that if he possessed someone else, he would definitely die, which was why he needed a chance. There were two chances for him to possess someone else. The first was that Old Man Extermination would not attack and kill him so that he would not have the chance to possess him. That was why, to complete this, Su Xian chose to possess Old Man Extermination once he absorbed a sufficient amount of resentment and split it into two. One of them approached Su Ming based on Old Man Extermination's will, and the other was borrowed by Su Xian to become a hint of hesitation that made Old Man Extermination reluctant to destroy him. As long as that hesitation appeared, then based on Old Man Extermination's personality, to ensure that his plan with Su Ming would succeed, he would definitely choose to possess Lei Chun so that the resentment would not disappear and become complete. This was Su Xianyi's first point. The second point was that Old Man Extermination could not fight against him at full strength because his enemy was Su Ming. With these 2 points in place, Su Xian would have the initiative and he could execute his second step, and that was possession. This possession was not Su Xian possessing Old Man Extermination, but he was willing to use his body as a medium to connect his son, Lei Chun, to Old Man Extermination. His ambition was not to possess Old Man Extermination completely, but to possess a part of him. As long as he could possess a part of him, he would be considered to have succeeded. With that part of him, he believed that the seed of life extermination fused with Lei Chun's body would make him indestructible. Because in a certain aspect, Lei Chun, who had the seed of life extermination, would be similar to Old Man Extermination. And the seed of life extermination's true function was to be created by Old Man Extermination using his own blood to pass down his life soul. He wanted to create the strongest abyss builder of his aeon as an offering to Xianzong. That offering would contain his seed of life extermination, and it would be a challenge to Xianzong. And the person he chose was Lei Chun. It was also why the baby in Su Xianyi's wife's womb had been cursed. In truth, it was not a curse, but a manifestation of the baby fusing with the seed of life extermination. But Old Man Extermination had miscalculated. He had miscalculated Su Xianyi's ambition and madness. He did not expect that Su Xian would use the mysteries of Death Vortex and the fact that it was a region that extermination could not probe into to separate the seed of life extermination from Lei Chun's body and plant it in Su Ming. Then he planted it in Yu Xian because her blood came from the second god of berserkers. The second god of berserkers might be a berserker, but he lived in Death Vortex and was a life that existed between life and death. Because of it, Su Xian had modified the seed of life extermination to a certain degree, and when Lei Chun fused with it again, it became the main point of his plan. Extermination, you lost. Will you control the resentment to seal Su Ming, or will you fight against the Abyss Builder's possession? To you, this is a very easy choice to make. No matter what you choose, the final meaning of possession is that you absolutely cannot possess yourself, but what you're doing right now is possessing yourself. You're possessing my son, Su Xianyi. You're possessing him, the one who has completely fused with the seed of life extermination. You're possessing yourself. As Su Xian laughed shrilly, his presence became weaker. Old Man Extermination's Tao divinity shrank, wanted to give up on possessing Su Xian but Su Xian had been planning this for years. His body was the intermediary, and he had long since allowed Lei Chun to possess him. There was already a part of his body that belonged to Lei Chun. His presence swiftly dissipated, but his laughter still echoed in the air. He knew that he had succeeded. At the moment Old Man Extermination chose to possess him, he had succeeded. Su Xianyi, Old Man Extermination's eyes widened in anger. When his Tao divinity instantly retracted, Lei Chun's presence seemed to have seeped into his bones. It fused with his Tao divinity and fused into Old Man Extermination's body. The first chapter. Chapter 1490. Once the withered wood of time was crushed and added to the clear water of time, it would turn into a clear piece of paper. No matter what color it was in the past, once ink was splashed on it, it would turn into the color of a world separated from the world, but it would never return to its original state. Su Xianyi's Tao was for his son, Lei Chun, to possess Old Man Extermination, but before that, he needed a chance. He needed help, and that help was the palm he had turned into at that moment. Under the space above Dark Dawn and Saint D fire that covered the universe, with the hate-filled gazes and the madness before the destruction of the world. With indescribable resentment, they turned into a curse that came from all manner of lives. This was a setup Old Man Extermination had set up a long time ago and gathered together the resentment. Regardless of whether it was Dark Dawn or Saint D fire, under Old Man Extermination's arrangements, they had all turned into Su Ming's appearance. When they moved about, they had slaughtered, causing all 360 expanse cosmoses in Dark Dawn and Saint D fire to be filled with indescribable resentment towards him. They had seen their family and friends brutally killed by Su Ming. They had also seen their people screaming shrilly in pain behind him. Even those who did not die had endured the torture of their bodies and souls, which allowed their resentment to exist for a long period of time. It could last for a long period of time, and before their worlds were destroyed, they could unleash an unprecedented madness in the midst of their unwillingness to die. The resentment was originally an illusory thing, but it could be seen as a will. The might of a single person's will was not great, but if 10 million, 100 million, 10 billion, or even more people from all 360 expanse cosmoses from Dark Dawn and Saint D fire cursed one person at the same time during the moment when their lives were at their most dazzling, then it would become real. This was a truth that could be created out of nothing. In fact, this power could be seen as Tao in certain aspects. If it was placed in the eyes of a country and its people desired for it to be destroyed, then that country would definitely be destroyed. This was only in the mortal world. In the cultivation world, the same principle existed. If someone used it, it could become a sharp weapon. At the most crucial moment, it could explode with the most powerful attack. The resentment from Dark Dawn and Saint D fire gathered together at that moment and was immediately absorbed by the huge palm formed by Su Xian, causing it to instantly turn even darker, as if it contained the power of the universe. During that instant, the palm swayed and overlapping shadows appeared on it. It had shockingly split into two. When the palm split into two, Old Man Extermination's pupil shrank while he sat cross-legged on the ancient ship in the fourth expanse cosmos. One of the palms that had split into two had Old Man Extermination's will tear through space and charge towards Arid Triad. As for the other, it also tore through space, but it headed to the fourth expanse cosmos, where Old Man Extermination was. Su Xian. A glint appeared in Old Man Extermination's eyes. Almost at the instant he spoke, the huge palm formed by Su Xian shot through space and appeared in front of Old Man Extermination's ancient ship. Su Xian's face manifested on the palm. There was determination and madness on it, along with a hint of hatred that had been buried in his heart for an unknown number of years. Abyss Builder Possession. Su Xian threw his head back and roared. The palm formed by him instantly touched the ancient ship with endless resentment and charged towards Old Man Extermination. You overestimate yourself. Old Man Extermination let out a cold harumph. Your clan was created by this old man. You dare to take over this old man's body? Old Man Extermination swung his arm, and a gust of black wind charged forward. It instantly turned into a huge skull in front of him, and there was a small person sitting cross-legged on it. That small person looked exactly the same as Extermination, and it was his Tao divinity. At that moment, the small person's expression remained the same. The skull under him opened its mouth and charged towards Su Xian. But the instant the skull closed in on Su Xian, Old Man Extermination frowned. He seized the air with his right hand, and the skull instantly disappeared. I can't waste the resentment gathered on you. If my plan against Su Ming is affected because of you, then even if you die 10,000 times, you won't be able to make up for it. Since you like possessing others, then I will reward you with the glory of being possessed by me. A ferocious smile appeared at the corners of Old Man Extermination's lips. As he spoke, he swung his arm, and his Tao divinity immediately appeared in front of him. It opened its mouth wide and revealed a ferocious expression before turning into a long arc that charged towards the palm formed by Su Xianyi. With a loud bang, Old Man Extermination's Tao divinity and the palm formed by the resentment of Su Xianyi crashed into each other. Immediately, they began possessing each other, but Su Xianyi was clearly not as good as Old Man Extermination. In just the span of a few breaths, half of the palm formed by him was occupied by Old Man Extermination. However, not a hint of panic could be seen on Su Xianyi's face. Instead, a hint of derision appeared at the corners of his lips. There was arrogance in that derision, along with confidence that he would never miss anything. There was also an expression that said that he no longer had any attachment to life and was instead looking forward to a better future. Extermination, you lost. Su Xianyi laughed loudly as he was possessed. Old Man Extermination frowned. At the instant he did so, his expression changed. At that moment, a third person's presence appeared on Su Xianyi's body. The third person's presence belonged to Lei Chun. At that moment, Lei Chun was sitting cross-legged in the palace in the fourth true world. His entire body was filled with countless fine black needles. He shuddered, and tears fell from his eyes. His body swiftly withered away at that instant. His will, his soul, his life, and everything else appeared on Su Xianyi's body in the form of his blood. This was Su Xianyi's plan. He knew that he could not fight against Old Man Extermination. Regardless of whether it was his level of cultivation or his ability to possess someone, he was far inferior to him. He knew that if he possessed someone else, he would definitely die, which was why he needed chance. This chance could be divided into two parts. The first was that Old Man Extermination would not attack and kill him so that he would not have the chance to possess him. That was why, to accomplish this, Su Xianyi chose to possess Su Xianyi once he absorbed a sufficient amount of resentment. One of them would approach Su Ming based on Old Man Extermination's will, and the other would be borrowed by Su Xianyi to become a hint of hesitation that made Old Man Extermination reluctant to destroy him. As long as that hesitation appeared, then based on Old Man Extermination's personality, he would definitely choose to possess Su Ming so that the resentment would not disappear and become complete. This was Su Xianyi's first point. The second point was that Old Man Extermination could not fight against him at full strength because his enemy was Su Ming. With these 2 points in place, Su Xianyi would have the initiative and he could execute his second step, possession. This possession would not be Su Xianyi possessing Old Man Extermination, but he was willing to turn his body into an intermediary to connect his son, Lei Chun, to Old Man Extermination. His ambition was not to possess Old Man Extermination completely, but to possess a part of him. As long as he could possess a part of him, he would be considered to have succeeded. With that part of him, he believed that the seed of life extermination fused with Lei Chun's body would make him imperishable. Because in a certain aspect, Lei Chun, who possessed the seed of life extermination, would already be similar to Old Man Extermination. The seed of life extermination's true function was to be created by Old Man Extermination using his own blood to inherit his life soul. He wanted to create the strongest abyss builder of his aeon as an offering to Xianzong. That offering contained his seed of life extermination, and it was a challenge to Xianzong. And the person he chose was Lei Chun. This was also why the baby in Su Xianyi's wife's womb had been cursed. In truth, it was not a curse, but a sign that the baby had fused with the seed of life extermination. However, Old Man Extermination had miscalculated one thing. He had miscalculated Su Xianyi's ambition and madness. He did not expect that Su Xianyi would use the mysteries of Death Vortex and the fact that it was a region that Old Man Extermination could not pry into to separate the seed of life extermination from Lei Chun's body and plant it in Su Ming. Then, he planted it in Yu Xian because her blood came from the second god of berserkers. The second god of berserkers might have been a berserker, but he lived in Death Vortex. He was a life that existed between life and death, which caused Su Xian Yi to modify the seed of life extermination to a certain degree. Then, he had Lei Chun fuse with it again, and this detour became the main focus of his plan. Old man extermination, you lost. Will you control the resentment to seal Su Ming, or will you fight against the Abyss Builder's possession? To you, this is a very easy choice to make. No matter what you choose, the final meaning of possession is that you absolutely cannot possess yourself. But what you're doing right now is possessing yourself. You're possessing my son, Su Xianyi. You're possessing him, the one who has fused with the seed of life extermination. You're possessing yourself. As Su Xianyi laughed shrilly, his presence became weaker. Old man extermination's Tao divinity shrank in his body, wanted to give up on possessing him, but Su Xianyi had been planning this for years. His body was the intermediary, and he had long since allowed Lei Chun to possess him. There was already a part of his body that belonged to Lei Chun. His presence swiftly dissipated, but his laughter still echoed in the air. He knew that he had succeeded. At the moment old man extermination chose to possess him, he had succeeded. Su Xianyi, old man extermination's eyes widened in anger. When he retracted his Tao divinity, Lei Chen's presence seemed to have seeped into his bones. It fused with his Tao divinity and fused into old man extermination's body. The first chapter. Chapter 1491. Old man extermination's expression was incredibly dark. It was just as Su Xianyi had said. The deepest meaning behind possession was that no one could possess themselves. This was a law, and it was also a forbidden zone. After all, once someone possessed himself, another self would be split in his body. This was an invisible separation, and it also meant that no matter how strong or weak they were, it was impossible for them to devour each other. They could only coexist. Old man extermination knew this, but under Su Xianyi's plan, old man extermination possessed Lei Chun, and Lei Chun had the seed of life extermination. Since they came from the same source, it meant that he was possessing old man extermination. He could only watch helplessly as Lei Chen's presence fused with his Tao divinity and returned to his body. Old man extermination could sense Lei Chen's existence, and he could sense his own will, which was filled with hatred toward him, and Lei Chen's will, which could not be wiped away. Su Xianyi, what a man! A glint appeared in old man extermination's eyes. When he lifted his right hand, he pointed at the palm Su Xianyi had formed. With a bang, the palm crumbled to reveal Su Xianyi's body. Then, with another point from old man extermination, Su Xianyi's storage bag shattered, and the fifth kiln appeared. He tightened his grip again, and the fifth kiln shattered. The woman's body in it was reduced to powder during that instant, just like Su Xianyi's body. She was completely wiped off. Lei Chen's will trembled in old man extermination's body, and his hatred grew stronger. It's good that you're my body. If that's the case, watch as I destroy everything. Once I think of a way to extract you, I will let you taste despair. Now, watch how I will seal Su Ming and turn him into an offering. As old man extermination laughed ferociously, he lifted his right hand and swung it before pointing at space. With it, the black-robed young man on the feng shui compass that was continuously absorbing harmonious Morris Alba's life force in the vast expanse around the butterfly suddenly lifted his head. Sacrificial offering, the black-robed young man murmured, and his cold eyes suddenly lit up. However, the light was very dim, as if it could be extinguished at any moment. Only at this moment did he seem like a living being. As he mumbled to himself, the black-robed young man lifted his right hand and pointed at the butterfly below. With it, a gust of wind instantly stirred up and turned into a gust of black smoke that charged at the harmonious Morris Alba. It looked like it wanted to take away the offering based on the direction old man extermination had given. At that moment, Su Ming looked at the people from the ninth summit in the vortex. He had already lifted his right hand, but he could never touch the edge of the vortex. It was as if fate could not be changed at certain times. The black palm formed by the resentment, Su Xian E absorbed and formed by Old Man Exterminations will shot through the vortex in the river of forgetfulness and appeared in front of Su Ming. It turned into an endless amount of resentment and curse that drowned Su Ming. It had become a seal. It had sealed the strongest cultivator of his aeon and branded him as an offering to wait for Xian Zhang's arrival. The resentment in the seal had turned into countless faces. They were ferocious, mad, and filled with a desire to see Su Ming immediately die. They dyed Su Ming's world black and sealed him in thick black fog. Su Ming died. You killed all my people. You must die. You must die. Ha! You can't save your family. We'll do everything we can to make you die. When you killed our people in the past, did you ever think that this day would come? Why aren't you dead yet? Countless faces appeared in the fog around Su Ming. They were all distorted and let out roars. There was no end to the faces, and they surrounded Su Ming while continuously letting out shrill roars and curses. They hated Su Ming, and their hatred had reached the pinnacle. Su Ming was silent. Grief appeared on his face. He stared at the fog around him. He could sense that the power of the seal in it might not be too strong, but it was enough to trap him for some time. Once that time passed, he did not know what would happen to the vortex in Ninth Summit. The one who killed your people and all of you wasn't me. There was a resolute tone in Su Ming's voice. When he said those words, a fierce look appeared in his eyes. He lifted his left hand and gathered the will of his true world and fused it with his Tao divinity's strongest attack. It instantly shot out from Su Ming's hand and charged at the fog. Booming sounds reverberated in the air and shook the fog in all directions, causing it to tumble about furiously. Su Ming moved, and without care for anything else, he executed his strongest attack once again. He continued attacking and moving forward, trying to use the shortest amount of time possible to rush out of this place. He might not have seemed to be using any sort of technique and was just attacking nonstop, but only Su Ming knew that every single time he attacked, he used his left hand. The palm lines on his left hand gradually became clearer as he attacked again and again. However, the faces and curses formed by the resentment in the fog around him also descended into madness at that instant. They tried to stop Su Ming with all their might. It doesn't matter whether you are or not. If I say you are, then you are. The voice instantly suppressed all the seals formed by the resentment and spread through the entire fog. When it echoed in Su Ming's ears, his footsteps came to a halt. He turned his head around and looked at the air. Endless fog surrounded him and gathered together to form a figure. It was Old Man Extermination's figure. He stared at Su Ming, and a smile appeared at the corners of his lips. You are an offering to Xianzong. This is your life. You can't escape, and you can't hide from it. The endless resentment in this expanse cosmos has turned into a curse, and I used your palm lines as a guide. This is something I deliberately arranged for you. The only thing I didn't expect was that the harmonious Morris Alba in this expanse cosmos would be so ruthless. It sent the people of Ninth Summit away, and they returned. Old Man Extermination smiled faintly and swung his arm. Immediately, the fog around him tumbled violently and turned into a huge palm formed by fog. Su Ming was at the center of it. I don't believe in fate. Su Ming stared at Old Man Extermination. As he spoke, he lifted his left hand and struck the fog behind him. With it, the fog around him roared, and the palm lines on Su Ming's palm manifested behind him. Are you talking about these palm lines? Su Ming asked while staring at Old Man Extermination. The illusory palm lines behind him were incredibly clear. When they touched the fog, booming sounds shook the sky and reverberated in space. These are indeed my palm lines. Su Ming lowered his head to look at his left hand. At the instant Old Man Extermination's pupils shrank, Su Ming swung his left hand, and it withered. It was so withered that it was as if his left hand had melted. In the blink of an eye, Su Ming's entire left hand disappeared. Only his left sleeve was left floating in the air. You were born with those palm prints, and you can't change them. Even if you, as Old Man Extermination spoke, his pupils shrank again, and disbelief appeared on his face. He saw the fog around him swiftly dispersing at that instant. The resentful faces in the fog seemed to have lost their eyes and their ability to sense things. They could no longer find Su Ming. The rumbling grew even more intense, and the fog in the area began to rapidly dissipate. It was as if the gigantic palm had become a rootless duckweed and was about to crumble. This is impossible unless you... Old Man Extermination's expression changed. He thought a possibility. Your left hand was cut off before you left behind that palm print in the past. You did not just cut off your flesh and blood, but also cut off the connection between your soul and your arm. It was all for the sake of making me make a mistake. A mistake that you might not know my goal, but it was a foreshadowing. When Old Man Extermination spoke, Su Ming did not speak. Instead, he swiftly retreated, and with one step, he stepped out of the fog. Almost at the instant Su Ming walked out of the fog, he saw the seal formed by his blood in the vortex in front of him, which prevented the river of forgetfulness from flowing backwards and the people from Ninth Summit from returning. It shattered, and the river of forgetfulness flowed in reverse. The faces Su Ming was familiar with from the people from Ninth Summit appeared in the vortex at that moment. They had already been reversed and returned to this expanse cosmos. Blood capillaries filled Su Ming's eyes. The third eye at the center of his brow opened. His Tao divinity also opened its eyes, and madness appeared in them. However, Su Ming knew that he could no longer execute any divine abilities to send them back, because there was no time left. He only had one choice: cut off the river of forgetfulness. He had to cut off the river of forgetfulness, cut off all connections with the expanse cosmos, cut off all karma with the people from Ninth Summit, and cut off their path home. Only by doing so could they have a chance of survival in the midst of destruction. Su Ming did not have time to hesitate. With grief in his eyes, he lifted his right hand and cut down on the river of forgetfulness that was flowing backwards in the vortex. Even if there was a stab of pain in his heart, and even if he would never be able to meet them again in the future, as long as they could live and still exist, it was enough for Su Ming. However, the scene in the secrets of the universe had long since been set in stone. Su Ming losing his left hand was also a part of the secrets of the universe. Fate could not be changed, and in truth, when Su Ming saw the secrets of the universe in the past, it had already been set in stone. At the instant Su Ming was about to cut off the river of forgetfulness, a low voice that caused all of Harmonious Morris Alba to tremble came from behind him, offering, wherever the voice went, all existences behind Su Ming would be destroyed, and all lives would be reduced to nothingness, except for a finger. Wherever the finger went, the world would be reduced to nothingness. A huge crack tore through space to reveal the endless universe beyond it. I am currently writing the third update. Everyone, please wait. If you're bored, you can go and take a look at the public reputation page. 2 pictures have been uploaded today. One of them is of Lu Jinbiao, and the other is of Situnan. You will see them once you reply. Also, do you have any monthly tickets left? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.